The story begins with a doctor asking our protagonist, Taesum, how he was feeling today, while the boy thinks that every day it's the same question. Depressed, the young man replies that his legs hurt, affirming in his mind that it's always the same answer every single day. The doctor says he understands and begins talking to the nurse, while our protagonist, immersed in his thoughts, mentions that he no longer tries to figure out when things started to go wrong. The nurse starts to lead him to his room, and the boy says that when he woke up, everything was already over. After waking up from the accident, the only things left for him were pitiful glances and the monthly insurance expenses, but the worst was the cruel reality of being paraplegic and in a wheelchair. The boy's expression is completely devastated. He explains that it was an accident caused by a drunk driver who was driving recklessly. It was a painfully ordinary day. Taesum had gone to the convenience store. The young man went to buy beers and some things to eat, but there was something different about that day. We see our protagonist distractedly using his phone while a truck begins to rush towards him. The thing that was especially different that day is that he was a bit unlucky, and it cost him his freedom. Realizing the situation, the young man panics, but before he could react, the items in his hand fly into the sky and he is struck. He states that it was a tragic day that simply ruined his life, and at that moment, the nurse was helping the boy lie down on the stretcher. Taesum comments that he felt an immense pain in his legs as if they were always being torn from his body. Looking at his hand with some medicine, the boy thinks that he has no choice but to rely on the medication every night to reduce his suffering. Finally, the boy mentions that people say God only gives trials you can bear, but he would have preferred to die than to go through this. After some time already at night in the hospital, the boy was sedated by the medication but still couldn't sleep. With the phone in his hand, the boy states that there weren't many things he could do being paraplegic, and the most he could manage was to read novels. The boy also thinks that he started reading a new one last week while staring at his phone with a notification that he received 50 free chapters. Taesum thinks that whenever he read novels with happy endings, he also felt happy, and it was comforting to read on days like that when sadness completely overwhelmed him. After staying up all night with a completely empty look on his face, the boy thinks that he had almost finished reading that novel and would finish it that night. Recapping the ending of the story he had read, Taesum explains that the wizard Aiden destroyed everything in his path and in the end claimed victory and chose to create a new world. He ended the old world and created a new one according to his own liking, and everyone lost their memories and lived a happy life. Even those who experienced traumatic deaths and those who Aiden cherished were there, and in the new world, everyone lived happily even without remembering that the war existed. However, with that ending, our protagonist was extremely irritated. What the hell it was? He thinks that the protagonist did everything to protect the world, but Aiden ended up undoing everything and destroying the world that he tried to save just to create a new one for himself. Trembling, our protagonist, Taesung, wonders why the novel he randomly chose to read also had to have a bad ending. Placing his hands over his head, the boy begins to cry incessantly, questioning why he couldn't be happy no matter what he tried. Consoling himself, he thinks that he certainly didn't care about the novel's ending, and that even if he woke up tomorrow, he would never be able to experience something like a happy ending, so the only thing he could do was fall asleep and face his reality. However, before the IV in his being, a blue light begins to emerge and illuminate the entire hospital. A holographic window appears informing that the mission, the wizard who dominates the world, has begun, and someone with clear eyes can be seen waking up. Taesum, who was completely different upon waking, is utterly confused about what was happening. He thinks it was as if he had seen a message in front of him and wonders what that was. Looking at his legs, the boy thinks that perhaps this is a hallucination due to the pain. However, when he looks to the side, the boy starts to notice that he was in a completely different house and not in the hospital where he used to stay. Analyzing the rustic appearance of the residence, Taesum begins to wonder where he was and what that was. The boy states that he had fallen asleep in a hospital, and trying to understand more of what was happening, Ta questions if he was dreaming while he starts to search for his phone. During the search for his smartphone, the boy notices that beside him there was a pot of water, and as he looks into it, he begins to see his reflection. Sweating nervously, Taesung realizes that his face and appearance were completely different and he looked like a new person. Our protagonist starts shaking the water bucket, wanting to know what had happened to his face since this was someone else's appearance. Something even more surprising happens, and as he realizes what he's doing, the boy notices that just now his legs had moved. Several holographic particles start to appear in front of him, leaving the young man confused, and then a system screen appears with some messages. Staring at that technology he had never seen before, Taesum begins to question what it was. The system said that this was the world of the wizard who dominates the world, and from now on, our protagonist must live as the character Mort Vernars. Seeing this, the boy realizes that it was the title of a novel he was reading the night before. Moreover, Mort is a supporting character in it, and while the boy tries to understand the situation, the system states that if Mort dies, Taesung will die too. Our protagonist begins trying to assimilate everything that is happening and says that this is true. Looking at his legs, the boy remains incredulous, not knowing whether to believe it. Taesung keeps moving his legs, saying that before he couldn't even feel his limbs, but now he could even move them. And now the boy could even stand up, and at that moment, we see that in his new body, The young man had an extremely athletic physique. He can't stop sweating, thinking that he could even clearly feel the ground beneath his feet and all the sensations around him. The sister reappears, materializing in front of Taesum, informing him that it is loading some information. Our protagonist is startled and various pieces of information begin to enter his mind along with the memories of the character Mord and all the events of the novel. He can feel all the memories of that body entering his head. From putting his hands over his hair, the boy begins to feel desperate about it all. Taesung says he could even see the kind of life Mord led and how it ended in the novel. Mord Verners, a son of the peculiar Vernars family and a warrior who in the future will become extremely powerful. He is an illegitimate son of the patriarch of the family, someone so powerful that even if the protagonist Aiden and his group fought together against Mord, it wouldn't be guaranteed that they would win. However, in the midst of a ritual to gain full control over his mind, Mord was ambushed by the protagonist and his group. And in short, he is a supporting character who only plays a supporting role. And after all this, Taesung questions why he became Mord. The screen appears again in front of him and finally informs him that Taesung must change the world's destructive fate. And with that, our protagonist's wish will be granted. Reading that and seeing the word wish, he becomes extremely interested, knowing that he could do many things with it. Our protagonist is hesitant, wondering if his deepest desire will really be fulfilled or if it's just a deception. With the system talking about destructive fate, he assumes that the hologram was probably referring to the novel's ending. So that system wants Taesung to protect the world instead of Aiden, who will destroy that land later, and with all that, the protagonist mentions that he needs to think a bit. The young man also says that he might be dreaming because he was tired of his previous life. Tae remembers moments from his last life where he hated repeating every day as a paraplegic. So if this were a dream, he didn't want to wake up and didn't care if it was a prank or something like that. And already thinking about his wish, the boy states that he wanted his body to return to how it was before the accident. In fact, he wouldn't be satisfied with just that. Once again, the young man remembers the request the system made while he begins to ponder something. The boy thinks that he had all the information about the novel, The Wizard Who Dominates the World. In addition to all of Mord's power and talent, changing the destructive fate was extremely worth trying as long as his wish would be granted. And finally, our protagonist declares that he wouldn't just try, no matter what, he would succeed. The explanation about Mord Verners continues as he is a part of the bloodline of Archduke Verners and is a bastard son. Without knowing who his mother was, the boy had a difficult life because a few days after his birth, his mother passed away. The young man began to be called the cursed one who killed his own mother and lived his life as a weakling, unable to withstand the pressure and insults from others. Then see Mord in the past with his head down being insulted by several nobles. It wasn't because he was weak or didn't know how to fight back. It was simply because the guilt of being the cursed one who killed his own mother consumed him from the inside out. But there were many things that would become turning points in the poor boy's life. Those who are of the Verners bloodline awaken their powers when they turn 15 years old. They call this awakening the awakening of divine blood, and those who go through this awakening must endure pain comparable to setting their body on fire. But after all this suffering, the person will be blessed with tremendous powers. However, for someone who was not entirely part of the Archduke's family, the chances of surviving the blood awakening were less than 1 in 5. Mord was different. The boy survived the awakening of new blood and gained great powers that made him extremely powerful. Taesung remembers the letter he received that said if he survived his 15th birthday, he should go to the Vernars family's main house. Our protagonist explains that Mord read the last letter his mother had left for him and went to where the Archduke's family lived. He agreed to undergo a test to be recognized by his father, whom he had never seen before. All of this explanation is Taesung's memories now in Mord's body. The boy thinks that according to all this, he must have arrived the day before at the Vernars' house to take the test. The boy considers that Mord is a supporting character in the novel, but Archduke Vernars is the antagonist of the story, and so the young man says he knows a lot about that family. This family already has several direct descendants, so would it be difficult for Mord, a bastard son, to be accepted by them as they would despise him? But growing up without parents made the supporting character full of a desire to be recognized as a son of the Archduke. However, his father only wanted to use him. Had he managed to survive the awakening of new blood made the boy so strong that even the protagonist would struggle in a fight against him. Since the supporting character didn't show all this power in the novel, Taesung sees this test as an opportunity to see the true potential of his new body. However, diverting his attention, a bearded man enters the room, calling our protagonist and asking if the boy had forgotten what day it was. Taesung thinks that this guy, according to Mord's memories, is an instructor named Todd, and he is the one who will personally oversee his test. Todd is a muscular man with short hair and a beard, and has various battle scars. In an imposing manner, the man asks what the boy was doing standing still. In his mind, the boy knows that this guy was quite ripped, as an instructor should be, and then he goes up to the man, asking if he was Todd. For some reason, the man finds the whole situation strange, thinking to himself that the boy seemed a bit different from yesterday, as if his personality had changed. And staring at our protagonist, Todd notes that even the boy's gaze was different from the day before, but he thinks that it was just his imagination. Todd asks Mord if the young man had forgotten the explanation about the test he was going to take, and Werner's retorts, asking what kind of test he was supposed to do, as he didn't remember. The soldier explains that it would be a test to see the boy's full potential, and analyzing the young man's body, he assumes that since he is strong, he must know how to fight. Sweating at the situation, Taesung realizes that he has barely gotten used to his nude body and already has to fight, thinking that he would have to fight for his life, but for some reason, the protagonist is extremely excited about it, seeing it as an opportunity. Nervous about what was about to happen, Taesung states that he wanted to test his powers, and this would be his first chance to do so. After a short period, we see the boy walking behind Todd through a forest. The instructor asks if the protagonist had also forgotten what he explained yesterday. But Mord is confused, and Todd explains that he had already mentioned that the boy should not claim to be Archuk's son. Our protagonist then confirms that he understands. Warren thinks that Todd was talking about the unwritten rules for bastards, but it didn't make sense to follow them since rumors were already spreading everywhere. And there are rumors that even the Archduke had already met Mord before, and soon everyone will discover who the bastard is that will become an official warrior. Several muscular students are also standing nearby, and Todd begins to approach them, saying that he had already arrived and noticed that everyone was already there. Werner stays silent, observing the situation, and one of the other students questions if that's the newcomer who will be tested that day. Meanwhile, Morn thinks that the other students seem too young to be ordinary trainees and are probably unofficial warriors. Todd says that he was already assuming that our protagonist knew how to fight, commenting that the way Werner's fights is different from common warriors. The young man begins to explain with a serious expression that Werner's uses weapons when they are not properly trained and prepared. But once they are trained, they will no longer depend on common weapons, as they will obtain something extraordinary. And with that family style, they will fight using only their own bodies and hands with their powers. Todd confirms this, noting that of course, those who are not of Werner's blood use weapons, but others learn combat skills. Warren thinks that he already knew about this because the Werner's family is the best warrior organization on the continent, and they achieved this solely through hand-to-hand combat. Our protagonist begins to think that it seemed almost impossible, but there is no weapon in this world that surpasses the physique of the Werners, regardless of the blacksmith who forges it. Todd begins to explain that this test will determine which affiliation the warriors should follow and how they should train, and he asks one of the students, named Vince, if he is ready. Vince nods, then says he is fully prepared as he begins to walk to the center of the training area. Todd orders Mord to fight against Vince, stating that the result of this fight will determine the boy's future, so he should give his all and prove that he possesses Werner blood. The two boys stare at each other for a moment, staying silent as they observe one another, and Vince begins to analyze his opponent. Vince questions Mord if the young man is sure he is 15 years old, as his face does indeed look like that of a 15-year-old. However, something seemed off considering how large the boy is. Vince wonders who the boy's father could be, mocking him afterward and calling him to fight. Taesung thinks to himself that he knew there were other bastards there besides Mord, and it seems that his father wasn't the only Archduke who strayed, asserting that he needed to focus on the fight, because only with power and brute strength could he achieve freedom, and power is very important in that world. And although it's appealing to think about living a calm and simple life far from there, he believes he had no choice in the matter, as he knows what will happen in the future of that world. Bernard gets into a fighting stance, commenting that he would have to prove his abilities right there in front of everyone. Quickly surprising the blonde boy, our protagonist charges at him, ready to throw a punch. With a surprise hook, Vince manages to dodge just in time, feeling a bit shocked and surprised by that sudden move. The boy starts sweating, thinking that he didn't know Mord knew how to fight, but apparently the boy had some idea of how to. Taesun begins to spin, affirming in his mind that he was more agile than expected, and he thought that the boxing he learned when he was younger was paying off. He learned this fighting style just to pass the time, but it was better than nothing. So with his spin, the boy takes the opportunity to land a kick against his opponent Vince. The blonde manages to defend with his guard. However, he is thrown far away and barely manages to stop himself. Irritated, the boy admits that Mord was extremely good at fighting, and stands up again. The young man tells our protagonist that he was lying when he said he didn't know how to fight and was probably trying to take advantage of that. However, Taesung seems not to understand and says there's no reason to lie. Still, Vince insists that Mord was lying, judging by his stance. Mord, surprising everyone, replies that he just needed to copy what others do, and hearing this, the blonde boy becomes extremely irritated for some reason. Silently, he charges at his opponent with some greenish energy in his hand, leaving our protagonist startled. One of the other bastard sons questions why Vince is using mana, asking him to stop, but the instructor interrupts, ordering the two to continue fighting. Even so, the student remains extremely concerned about the situation, fearing for our protagonist's life, but the instructor insists once more, telling them to let the two fight. Mord is impressed that his opponent is using mana against him. However, despite this, the young man takes a fighting stance without hesitation. Vince, extremely irritated, questions how that bastard dared to insult him. The young man says that from that moment on, he wouldn't hold back anymore, so our protagonist should be happy with the lesson he was about to learn. However, even with Vince's mana-infused punch, Mort easily sidesteps and dodges the attack. Vince is extremely shocked and worried, questioning how that boy managed to dodge the attack and how a novice like him had such skill. Our protagonist was about to say something, but Vince continues questioning how that bastard could so easily predict mana combat techniques and Mort turns, looking at Vince. The boy finishes his sentence, asking if now it was his turn while starting to conjure various mana particles around his hand. Then he suddenly disappears. Vince thinks it's impossible, raising his guard and noting that you spent years training his mana combat techniques, yet you was struggling against a novice. At that moment, Werners lands a solid punch to his opponent's stomach, causing Vince to groan in pain from the blow. Vince faints and is thrown far away with extreme ease. All the other bastards and even the instructor are shocked by the scene, unable to believe what they were seeing. Todd thinks that he had imagined that this kid was just a novice, but he sent a warrior like Vince flying. Staring at Mord's back, the instructor states that the boy was extremely incredible and impressive. After practically defeating his opponent without giving him a chance to retaliate, our protagonist begins walking toward the boy who was lying on the ground. Mord stops in front of Vince and stares at him without saying a word for some time. The boy thinks that it would have been much worse if he hadn't dodged Vince's last attack, also stating that he now understood how to use that power. However, the blonde, who is sitting on the ground, starts making some movements with his hand clenching his fists. Mord takes a combat stance, questioning the blonde if he could still stand after taking a blow like that, highlighting that warriors are different. Tesson notices that even though Vince is nearly unconscious, his opponent is about to do something, and the boy is surprised by Vince's determination. One of the students questions his instructor about how Vince was defeated by a novice with just one blow, and everyone wonders where that boy came from. Mord turns to his instructor and says that he didn't know how to control his strength, so he was afraid of killing his opponent if he continued the fight. Todd gets lost in thought, stating that Mord was just a student while he was an instructor. The man thinks that the purpose of an instructor is to measure the potential and power of those being tested, pushing them to their limit, and a test taker should not be able to defeat an instructor. However, he didn't know what would happen if that fight between the two took place. So to avoid further confusion, Todd orders the fight to end, and then one of the other students walks over to Vince, helping him up. Irritated, the instructor approaches our protagonist, questioning why the boy had lied. However, hearing this, Mort is confused. Todd says that the boy claimed he had never learned to fight, but from what he had just seen, it proved otherwise. Mort explains that he truly never learned to fight in his life and hadn't lied at any point. But the instructor asserts that he won't believe it since it's impossible for someone who has never learned mana combat techniques to suddenly use them in a fight. Werners, in an attempt to cover for himself, says that he didn't know that was mana, as he could only use it after becoming completely enraged, and he didn't even know what it was. Todd doesn't believe that explanation and asks the boy if he thought he could really convince an instructor with decades of experience with just an excuse. Still trying to keep his true nature hidden, the boy begins to talk to Todd about his blood awakening experience and what happened. It's explained to us that Mord could use mana before his awakening, which is why he is so talented. The god of combat Werners and the goddess of the heavens Arita. The blood of these two gods runs through Mord's veins. This created an incredible synergy, making the boy a miraculous being. In other words, Mord had a blessed genetic heritage. The boy hadn't received even a minimally decent training until he was 15 years old. Yet, in just 7 years, he would become stronger than Archduke Werners and the strongest successor to the god of combat, and that's how the story evolved. After coming up with an appropriate excuse that was also a half-truth, Todd began to believe it, saying that if it were true, the boy was a monster of talent. The instructor then asked the boy if he had any idea who Vince was, and the boy explained that since he met the blonde for the first time, he didn't know who he was. Vince was a Werners warrior who had been trained from an early age and had gone through an extremely complicated test. And even with all that, a novice like Mord had defeated him just like that. Putting that aside, Todd explained that our protagonist earned 200 points and passed a test that has a maximum score of 100 points, questioning what he would do now. But the boy was confused because he didn't know what to do since the instructor hadn't explained anything. Mord then stated that he still didn't know what this test was for, and his instructor began to explain that the test was to define the level he was at. The Archduke Werners family has 3 basic levels for warriors. If you meet the requirements of each level, you move on to the next, and if you pass the test of the final level, you could be classified as an official warrior. The catch was that these tests were extremely difficult, and many saw it as an impossible mountain to climb, and Mord understood what he was saying. The boy asked his instructor Todd if he could place him at the first level, and the man was extremely confused. Mord said he needed to learn about mana combat techniques from the basics and wondered if they taught that at the second level as well. Todd replied that they didn't, and our protagonist asked if he could move up a level whenever he met the requirements for each one, and Todd confirmed, still puzzled by that decision. Despite all the options available to him, Taesung still preferred to start at the first level, saying this with confidence. Todd just stared at the boy, thinking that he was really serious, and since he was just a bastard, he thought this was the best option for him. The man turned around, agreeing, and said that it's not like he could give special treatment to the boy just because he had defeated a warrior. Then before leaving, the instructor said that the classes for the day were over and that he would send someone to explain the first level to our protagonist the next day. Already lying in one of the rooms in that place, the boy began to think that the test had been extremely easy. Taesung wondered if Mord went through this whole process that he was now experiencing, since the novel didn't go into much detail about how Mord became Archduke Vernar's trump card. But that made sense as the boy was just a supporting character in the story, and there was no reason to delve deeper into his background. The boy only remembered that the Archduke of Vernars tried to maximize Mord's potential and dominate his mind to use him as a human weapon. The boy recalled that Mord was always beaten as a child and never fought back, assuming that in his past life, the supporting character must have been beaten and stayed at the first level. With all these memories and thoughts flooding his mind, the boy stated that he understood why he had possessed Mord's body. His past life is Taesum. He wasn't someone significant to the world, but he always fought when he felt wronged. In contrast, in the novel, Mord lived a completely different lifestyle, being the complete opposite of him. The boy got up and began to walk towards something in the room while thinking that he was going to save the world from destruction. And to do so, he had to stop the protagonist of the novel. The one who gathers the world fragments, which are like puzzle pieces containing the essence of this world, can be called the supreme god or the wizard who dominated the world. Just like in the title, the great wizard Aiden manages to gather the fragments and become a being who dominated the entire world. However, at some point, it corrupted him, and with it, he brought destruction to the world. Aiden not only killed his enemies, but also killed his own allies, and the novel depicts the struggle between Aiden and his enemies to become the world's destroyer. The next day, watching the sunrise, the boy thought that he would stop Aiden, no matter what it took. Because this might be the last chance for him, Taesung, and now he will live as Mord instead of his former self. The Vernars family governs the Archduchy of Vernars and is renowned worldwide in that world. The castle of Vernars, the heart of the nation, is as luxurious as other royal castles. But what sets it apart is the warrior training center, located outside the castle in the 3rd region, which is extremely massive. In a carriage speeding toward a certain location, someone informs the protagonist that from that day forward, he will stay in the 1st level dormitory. Mort thinks that the training center seems much larger than the campus of most universities in his world. However, that was the least to be expected. A loud noise of warriors dueling can be heard nearby, and immediately, our boy becomes alert. A person beside him explains that this is probably the 3rd level training center, and Mort asks if that noise indeed came from a group of trainees. After receiving a yes, the boy thinks that even though these people came from 2nd level trainees, they clearly managed to surpass human limits. Moreover, Vernar's warriors are known for their ability to merge various powers into one. The same man who had previously explained things to Mord says that they will soon arrive at the 3rd region and that the boy's instructor is waiting for him. After stepping down from the carriage, he thanks the person who brought him, and looking to the side, the boy notices that another large man is the 1st level instructor. A large and muscular man with black hair introduces himself as the 1st level instructor, Hayes, and he asks the novice to call him Instructor Hayes. Ward does as instructed, calling him as requested, and immediately after, the instructor questions if the boy's name is Mord and assumes he must have done very poorly on the test to be there. Surprising the instructor and leaving him shocked, the bastard replies that he defeated Vince in the first test, and Hayes questions if he had really beaten a warrior. After receiving confirmation, the man is incredulous, not believing what happened and wondering why the young man is there. Mord thinks there's no reason to lie about it since everyone will soon know, and explains that he never learned combat techniques, which is why he came here to learn the basics. Still shocked by everything he heard, the instructor confirms, asking the boy to follow him, while thinking that the novice defeated a warrior without any basic training. The two begin to walk toward the battle center. Hayes explains that there are some people training, so our protagonist shouldn't distract them. The boy thinks that this might be the 1st level, but the instructor must be strong, since he's training people who will become Vernar's warriors. Upon arriving, they see various muscular children, and the instructor introduces the new trainee, Mord. The man says that Mord is a novice, and at that moment, our protagonist is sweating, not believing that this level is meant for children. Mord starts to assume that he should have gone straight to the 3rd level, and if he had the option to change, he would have done so. Hayes questions if the boy had never learned mana combat techniques, and Verners explains that he hadn't, but for some reason, he could use mana. The instructor states that just by having gone through the awakening of divine blood, he's already blessed, and since he has no mana, what he's going to teach now will be very easy. Hayes begins to explain some steps that the boy probably already knows, so the final step is learning to control the basics of mana and sense amplification. Our protagonist asks if he doesn't need to learn anything about the basics of combat skills. The instructor then questions if the boy wants to stay there for a long time because if he does, you will make that happen. But he supposes that the boy wouldn't want that. Werner becomes extremely nervous and says to forget about it, and the instructor remarks that he understands what happened. The man states that he will try to teach the boy a few things, and after that, he'll have to learn everything on his own because at the second level, the instructor will only help with the things he's terrible at. Mord thinks that he needs to learn everything from the basics, and he cannot underestimate himself just because it's the first level. He needs to start from the beginning to master his power. The children are shocked, questioning if it even makes sense since the novice has only been training for 10 minutes. One of the children comments that they think the novice's mana is stronger than that of the instructors, and it's possible to see the boy surrounded by a blue aura. Imposingly, he asks if that's all or if there's more he needs to learn, and Mord continues to emit a crushing aura. Immediately, and somewhat frightened by all of this, the instructor responds that he has already surpassed the first level, and the boy wonders if that's really it. Now the second level, the boy begins to think that the physical reinforcement lessons at the second level are divided into two sublevels. The first is to strengthen your body, which helps prevent injury even if you get run over. And the second level is to amplify your abilities, allowing you to transcend the limits you reach when you train your muscles, as he demonstrates by striking a wall. The only thing visible after the blow is the hole the boy left, while he also remarks that physical reinforcement is a very difficult skill to learn. Turning and looking at his new second-level instructor, he says that all that's left is the practical test. But the new instructor thinks that the boy has already passed the second level. The man asserts that the boy doesn't need to do anything further and that just with what he's done, he will start the third level the next day. The instructor explains that the second level is easy, but the third will be much harder because as people who are part of the Werner's bloodline. With a serious expression, he states that the boy will face other powerful students without having learned any combat skills, relying only on his instincts. The young man realizes that he hasn't learned anything yet, and Hayes only sent him to the second level thinking he was hiding his power. Then the instructor puts his hand on Mord's shoulder, affirming that up to the second level, brute force is enough, but becoming a warrior at the third level won't be easy. Mord thinks that he already knew the third level would be difficult and in fact was excited to meet the people with the power of the divine blood awakening. The next day at dawn, we can see the quarters where the third level warriors stay. Some people are talking about the rumors related to Mord as he managed to pass through 2 levels in just 2 days and has Werner's blood. Fian, a red-haired young man who is also part of the bloodline, remarks that people like our protagonist only want to attract the Archduke's attention. With a serious expression of someone asking for trouble, he declares that he will show this wrath that there are rankings within the Werner's bloodline. People inform the red-haired boy that the novice has arrived, and shortly after, Mord reaches the place thinking he should have come here from the start. Fian, eager to make his point, approaches the brown-haired boy, questioning if he's the novice, and Mord responds by asking who he is. The boy introduces himself as the captain of the second class. Fian, our protagonist, thinks that this boy is also part of the Werner's bloodline, just like him. Mord also says that he is part of that bloodline and is in the third level, then introduces himself. With arrogance, Werner says that he doesn't know how long he will stay there. Hearing this as an insult, Fian gets irritated, letting his aura leak out, questioning if our protagonist thinks this is a joke. Dismissively, Mord tells him not to take it that way since he wouldn't have come here if he thought it was all a joke, which only enrages Fian further. Werner states that he's not in the mood for a fight right now, so he asks Fian to calm down. But the boy retorts that it's expected of someone from that bloodline. Because Mord was enduring his aura, and Mord says he won't be intimidated just by feeling the aura of a weakling, which further ignites his opponent's fury. The boy begins to conjure a reddish aura in his hand while questioning Mord if he thinks the world will bow to him just because he went through the awakening. With his aura leaking and his eyes completely red, Fian is blinded by rage, only thinking about defeating and finishing off that novice. Other students begin to laugh at the novice, saying that no one could stop Fian and that it would be difficult for the boy to stay alive if no instructor stepped in to stop the fight. Fian declares to Mord that he won't hold back since our protagonist is also of the Werner's bloodline. Then quickly, the red-haired boy rushes to attack the novice, trying to grab the young man's head with his hands and end the fight immediately. Blinded by rage, he says he'll make Mord pay for defaming that place and teach him a lesson about how the real world works. However, before he realizes it, a massive crash is heard, and a huge cloud of dust rises into the air, obscuring everyone's vision. The friend who was with Fian earlier comments that the power was monstrous, and that the novice was very unlucky to run into Fian, the leader there, but he hoped Mord would survive. As the smoke begins to clear, it becomes visible that one person is standing while another is kneeling as if they had taken a powerful attack and fallen to the ground. For some reason, all the other students are stunned by the scene, watching someone tremble after being struck by a powerful blow. The one standing is Mord, not understanding what is happening since he thought Fian was stronger and would at least withstand one of his attacks. However, looking at Fian lying on the ground with blood dripping from his nose and mouth, he remarks that Fian was nothing more than a bully who barked a lot but had no dignity. Defeated and with his ego shattered, Fian wipes the blood from his mouth. The young man stands up, still trembling from the blow, and curses our protagonist, claiming that you only got lucky. However, the boy imposingly states that it wasn't luck, it was because his opponent was too weak. Once again, Fian lets all of his aura and mana flow out and charges at his opponent to end the battle for good and prove his strength. Taking advantage of the opening Fian left by being enraged and blinded by anger, Mord easily sidesteps the blow with extreme ease. He uses this opportunity to spin his entire body and quickly position himself behind Fian, ready to land a kick just as he did with his first opponent, Vince. Then, coating his foot with mana, the boy kicks Fian, sending him flying again several meters away, causing the poor boy to crash into the ground multiple times. After rolling from the impact, Fian stops when he hits a wall, and at that moment, a curtain of dust rises with the impact. Watching his opponent lying unconscious, Mord thinks he overdid it and hadn't expected Fian to be so weak since the boy was the leader of the third level Vernar's warriors. Looking at his own hands, the young man judges that his strike was so strong because of the basic mana combat techniques he learned at the first and second levels. Worried, Fian's friend rushes to him, waking the boy to check if he's okay and trying to help him up. However, the warrior doesn't give up, and angry with all the humiliation, he pushes his own friend away, declaring that the battle isn't over yet. Mord, with extreme disdain and pity for his opponent, remarks that the boy had fainted and was unconscious for about 10 seconds. Despite everything, Fian doesn't let go of his pride and insists that it's a lie because Mord only struck him when he was off guard, which is why he was hit. Mocking his opponent, our protagonist says that leaving his guard down while fighting someone who will become a warrior is pathetic. Unleashing all of his rage and inner power, Fian declares that just because his opponent could talk didn't mean he could say everything that came to his mind. Thus, a red aura begins to envelop the young man, and the students, feeling that immense power, panic, realizing that Fian had awakened his powers. They shout at the novice to flee, otherwise he will die, but Mord remains unshaken and stands firm, thinking that Fian must have invoked the divine blood awakening. But he was controlling the divine blood in a completely wrong way, which makes sense since the boy was also a bastard child and didn't possess pure blood. Amidst all the chaos, someone begins to walk toward the two young men, questioning what the commotion was and trying to understand the situation. That person was an elder, and one of the students called him the third-level instructor, explaining that a fight between Fian and the novice had started. Observing the situation, the elder remained silent, and when his student asked if they should stop the two, the old man replied that they should do nothing and just wait for now. The elder thought that Fian was strong enough to compare to a regular warrior and hadn't had many opportunities to test the boy's true power, but now there was an opportunity. Looking at Mord, he assumed that this boy must be the Vernar's child who had reached the third level that day, so it wouldn't be too problematic if a child died. Red electricity began to course through Fian's body, and with a malevolent and extremely irritated smile, he declared that Mord would pay with his life. Mord, realizing what kind of power was in his opponent's hands, couldn't believe that his enemy could use such a technique. Fian clasped his hands together and quickly leaped towards Mord, attempting to strike from below with several powerful bolts of lightning emanating from his body. Seeing the attack coming his way, Vernar's thought that this was an advanced technique that uses the body or a weapon as a vessel to create a powerful magical form. The name of this power was Body Impulse, and finally, Fian landed on the ground, almost hitting Mord, who barely managed to dodge the attack, avoiding being struck. The powerful blow hit the ground, causing the entire area to emit a massive rumble and begin to crack. Seeing the sheer force behind his opponent's strike, Taesum thought it would be bad if he were hit squarely by that attack. But using his new power, Fian quickly approached our protagonist, telling him not to dare run away. And once again, he conjured several bolts of lightning in his hand, charging at the boy to end his life for all the disrespect he had shown. Before Fian could even react, he was quickly struck by a blow to his face, leaving him surprised. With blood once again flowing from his nose, Fian was incredulous at having been hit so suddenly, but he remained determined. A flurry of attacks followed, aimed at Mord, but the young man managed to dodge and counter every one of them. Even with his new power that allowed him to endure more hits, Mord was able to evade all of Fian's strikes without even using his divine blood. The students noticed that the novice wasn't taking any hits, but also commented that Mord's attacks didn't seem to affect Fian, as he appeared to be holding up well. However, the elder instructor pointed out that something was off, as the red-haired boy was indeed suffering and gradually wearing himself out in the fight. The red-haired boy became extremely exhausted, and the old man noted that Fian's impulse was weakening. Mord remarked that it was time to get a bit more serious, and changing his strategy, it was now Vernar's who charged at his enemy to land a blow. With a quick punch, the boy struck Fian's stomach, catching him off guard and preventing him from reacting to the extremely fast attack. When he was hit, Fian groaned in pain, with more tomato juice spilling from his mouth. The boy was once again thrown far away, and Mord remained in his fighting stance, apologizing because he tried to hold back, but seemed to have used too much force. Recovering from the punch, Fian angrily told Mord to shut up, claiming that all he had done so far was run away like a coward, trying to set a trap for him. However, Taesum became extremely irritated by this, merely listening to Fian's threats and using them as fuel. Imposingly, he declared that he would stop dodging and that he had been going easy, but since Fian was getting on his nerves, he would end this. Fian thought he had successfully manipulated our protagonist, assuming the boy had fallen into his trap. He then charged once again at his enemy, telling Mord not to regret it after being defeated. For some reason, the boy simply stared at the powerful punch coming his way, doing nothing to dodge, just as he had said. With the impact of the blow, numerous mana particles were scattered throughout the area, creating a brilliant light. When the students could see again, they realized that Mord was holding Fian's arm. The boy explained to his opponent that impulse doesn't work when your enemy is stronger, so Fian's attacks were nothing because Mord was stronger. Also invoking a power in his hand, but now with a bluish aura, Mord concluded by saying that this was a great lesson. Fian, filled with desperation, realizes that a user of impulse is supposed to always win against someone who doesn't have that power. It's common sense. But this guy Mord had changed everything. The last thing the red-haired boy sees is a punch coming straight at his stomach, and Fian thinks he never had a chance of winning. Once again, he's thrown back, groaning in pain, and soon after, the boy rolls across the ground, already defeated. Finally, he crashes into a wall, raising his hand as if to say something, but before he can utter a word, he collapses unconscious, unable to withstand the impact of the blows. The instructor, shocked, wonders where a monster like Mord came from, as a bastard child had defeated Fian without even using impulse. Watching the scene, he mutters that he has trained many Werners, but he has never seen a bastard child so talented. Mord had managed to close the gap between himself and someone of direct lineage. Mord turns, asking if anyone else wants to fight him, and finally the instructor comments that the boy is only 15 years old and already this strong, which means he's a monster. Daisley begins to leave the area, instructing his students to hurry and take Fian to the medical center, and one of them acknowledges the order. He thinks that if he doesn't do something about this, the chain of command here will crumble, and no matter how talented Mord is, it doesn't change the fact that he's just a bastard child. Imagining Mord as a small puppet, the old man concludes that he needs to find a way to control that boy at all costs. Our protagonist begins to explain that Fian was seriously injured in the fight yesterday, and that he has to stay in the medical center now. Because of the blows he received, the boy fell into a coma and hasn't woken up until this very moment. As a result, Mord was placed in solitary confinement for 4 days, during which he spent time reading some combat tactics in a book. Closing the book he was reading, the boy remarks that this theoretical combat test was quite easy. Considering that he did postgraduate studies in his past life, the theoretical test shouldn't be a problem for him, and he would be able to handle it. The boy begins to stretch, stating that staying in the dormitory all day was boring, so he would go practice his mana combat technique. A mysterious figure arrives, telling Mord that he heard he had already caused trouble in the He'll find out when he gets to the designated location. Todd also mentions that the boy doesn't need to change his clothes since the Archduke doesn't expect him to know noble etiquette, so he's fine as he is. Our protagonist simply agrees, thinking that Archduke Werners didn't care much for noble etiquette even in the novel, and with that, they set off. Todd explains that rumors about the boy have spread everywhere, about how he completed the first and second levels and he didn't expect things to go so smoothly. He also mentions that he thought the boy was very smart, and that he's sure others think the same. Mord doesn't understand what his instructor means and asks what he's talking about, to which the man replies that it was all planned to attract the Archduke's attention. However, surprising him, Mord denies it, saying that he wouldn't risk his morals just to gain the Archduke's attention, since if he wanted attention, he could just become a powerful warrior. Todd thinks the boy isn't wrong and that this is better than the things he has done so far. He then explains to his student that the Archduke received a report about what happened and became interested. Taesung remarks that defeating Vernars would indeed attract the Duke's attention, so he wasn't surprised by this. As they approach the Archduke's training area, Todd advises the boy not to do anything wrong. After stepping down from the carriage, the two observe a battle taking place nearby. Our protagonist's father is surrounded by a pink mana shield while several warriors attempt to attack him. He looks at the man with long hair and a beard, identifying him as Archduke Werners, and notes that the aura is powerful, and the man even resembles a muscular giant. The warriors surrounding Werners quickly move in to break the barrier that protects him. Everyone strikes the shield immediately. However, despite the cracks forming, no one manages to break it. Seeing that his guest has finally arrived, the Archduke says that it's enough and begins to do something. A spiraling sphere starts to form in his hand, absorbing the surrounding mana particles, turning a deep red. Suddenly, what was a small marble-sized orb transforms into a large soccer ball in Wernher's hand. The enormous sphere rapidly evolves into a powerful and gigantic magic orb that begins to draw everything around it toward itself. For some reason, upon seeing this, Ward seems to recognize the ability, and then Werners prepares to conclude his attack. The boy explains that this is a powerful ability that absorbs both physical and magical attacks and converts them into a shockwave that throws enemies away. The massive magic sphere that was once gigantic concentrates in the palm of Vernar's hand, and the man launches it at his opponents like a burst of energy. The blast creates a massive crater in the wall, and a curtain of smoke rises as all the other adversaries are flung back. Seeing this, the boy thinks that the god of combat's reflector is the name of this ability, and he believes it's still being developed by his father Vernar's. After launching the attack, the man considers that it's still not enough, and our protagonist concludes that even in its incomplete state, the ability is already incredibly powerful. Turning to face the instructor and his son, the Archduke apologizes for making them wait, and the two quickly kneel, bowing before the Lord. The man walks over and Mord, saying that since he called the boy there, he doesn't need to follow etiquette and can stand. In front of his son, the man appeared as a giant towering over him. He then says he heard that the boy did some interesting things at the training facilities. Grabbing his son's chin, he asks who the boy's mother was, and the boy explains that her name was Reina. The man states that he remembers her and notes that our protagonist seems to take after his mother more than his father, then asks if the young man has already gone through the blood awakening. Vernars also mentions that he heard Mord defeated an impulse user using only body reinforcement and wanted to see just how strong his son was. Suddenly, the Archduke shouts for someone named Kessner, and a young man appears behind him, addressing him as Your Majesty. The father of our protagonist states that he wants this Kessner to fight against Mord, and the boy questions whether it's really necessary to fight a young man. Hearing this, the man says that this is his son who recently arrived, and he wants to see how strong the boy is, so his subordinate shouldn't go too hard on him. Looking at his opponent, Mord realizes that he is one of those who were training with the Archduke earlier, and Kessner asks the boy to follow him to the duel arena. He informs the young man that he could use any weapon and that he would wait for the boy to choose. However, Taesung says he doesn't need one. Getting into a fighting stance, Mord explains that he never learned to wield a weapon, so he'll only use his fists. Kessner lets out a small chuckle, underestimating the boy and asking if he's really serious. Immediately afterward, he charges at Mord to attack him and see what the boy is capable of. He throws a strike at the boy, but the young man easily manages to dodge it. In his mind, Mord thinks that his opponent is fast, which is expected of someone close to the Archduke. Kessner comments that the boy dodged without using mana, getting excited. A barrage of blows begins to come at Mord, who tries to defend himself but quickly realizes that this opponent is on a completely different level compared to Vince and Fian. After the sequence of strikes, the boy is thrown back and barely manages to stay on his feet, still alive in the fight. Kessner begins to emit his aura, which is ablaze, saying that he likes the way our protagonist fights because even when cornered, he wasn't giving his all. Mord starts to sweat from the heat he's feeling, thinking that his opponent is using mana, and judging by the strength, he must be of the Vernar's bloodline. The boy also acknowledges that now that he thinks about it, he has never fought with everything he has while observing his opponent walking towards him. The young man begins to summon his mana as well, stating that since his opponent is someone from the Archduke's entourage, it should be worth it to give his all, so he won't hold back. A powerful and brilliant blue energy begins to emanate from Mord's body. The auras of the two extremely powerful opponents clash like a battle in the jungle. The Archduke was impressed by what he saw, and Kessner couldn't believe that this was the mana of an apprentice. Taesung thought that Mord probably never maximized his potential since he grew up hearing people call him the cursed one who killed his mother. The boy likely never had the chance to use his full power due to the guilt he carried on his shoulders. Now in battle stance, the current Mord begins to think that this time would be different because he was going to do this from a Mord who never got to unleash his true power. With a serious expression in his fighting stance, Taesung starts to provoke Kessner, asking him to come at him. Kessner laughs, confirming, and quickly, with all the speed and explosiveness, charges at Mord, saying he's going to teach him a lesson. Mord manages to defend himself with his arms, preventing his opponent's attack from reaching his face. Kessner admires his opponent, saying he understands why the Archduke is interested in the boy because the rumors were not false. But all of that was useless, so with one fist still pressing against our protagonist's guard, the man unleashes an unknown attack. Once again, Mord is thrown back, thinking that he was sure he blocked it, and assumes that must be a technique that doubles the attack's impact. Kessner doesn't give him a chance to breathe, affirming that the boy still has a lot to learn, and quickly charges at him again to end the fight. Before Mord could think about how vast the power gap between them was, he was struck by a powerful blow to his stomach. The boy is slammed into the wall, feeling the impact of the punch and spitting out some saliva. Kessner gives a small smile, stating that he hasn't even started yet, so the boy better not disappoint him. As the dust clears, the Archduke's subordinate knight starts to mockingly ask if that was all our protagonist had. Still hurt from the attack, the young man tries to stand up, acknowledging that there's a huge difference between them, even without the man using impulse. As he struggles to his feet, Mord wonders if he should use the power of divine blood, but he dismisses the idea, realizing that if he did, his opponent would likely do the same. Kessner starts to get irritated, saying that the boys seem to be overthinking things. Mord remains silent, groaning in pain and wiping the blood from his mouth caused by the blow. When he doesn't hear a response, Kessner becomes even more annoyed, stating that if the boy won't fight with everything he has, he'll force him to do so, charging at him again. Kessner notices that the young man is finally about to fight seriously, and our protagonist raises his hand to strike him. However, the man easily dodges, forcing the boy to punch the ground instead. Pleased and excited by the battle, he says this is what he wanted and immediately goes on the offensive again. Preparing his punch, Mord thinks that he didn't want to show everything he was capable of just yet, but getting beaten up was boring, so he decided to hit back. A sincere exchange of blows between the two begins, with punches almost impossible to see. After trying to land a direct hit on his opponent, Kessner dodges the blow and comments that the boy made too many unnecessary movements. Come slightly below, the man remarks that the young man is talented, but his combat skills are still that of a novice as he begins to gather mana in his hand. The man launches the attack at his opponent but only manages to hit his forearm. Kessner comments that he thought the boy wasn't going to defend anymore. Moore responds, saying that he knew he would do that, and then counterattacks with mana, landing a solid hit on his opponent's vulnerable arm. However, Kessner is surprised to realize that the attack on his arm was the same one he used earlier, double attack. The man notices that his opponent had not only blocked his attack on purpose, but had also copied the movement, replicating it too quickly. Kessner becomes extremely irritated, clenching his fists as he realizes that the boy managed to replicate his double attack way too fast. A golden aura with several lightning bolts begins to emanate from the man's hand, and he says he's becoming more impressed and interested in our protagonist. And because of that, Mord would now have to give it his all. Seeing that his opponent was using impulse, the young man wonders if his enemy is finally going to use his true power. However, the Archduke immediately interrupts the fight, ordering them to separate, surprising Kessner. The elder tells his subordinate that what they had done was enough to test Mord's strength. He begins walking towards his son, remarking that it's incredible to see the young man at this level, especially since he just went through the Blood Awakening. However, cutting short the moment of pride, the Archduke comments that there's something else he wants to see and begins to prepare a burst of energy in his hand. The protagonist realizes that it's an impulse sphere and wonders why his father is suddenly using it. Immediately, the boy puts his hands forward, trying to absorb the attack to avoid his death. In his mind, the boy curses Werners while questioning if his body can withstand this force. Trying to push beyond his limits, the young man declares that he won't use his secret ability and will endure it with just his body. Memories of the battle against Fian come back, and the young man comments that he only managed to block the impulse because he was stronger than his opponent, so that wouldn't work here. However, if he used impulse as well, he could block it, and quickly the boy invokes a white aura in his hand, stopping the attack. His father smiles, and Todd is stunned, stating that it's impossible because our protagonist just went through the Blood Awakening. Seeing all the blue energy flowing from his student, the instructor questions how the boy is already able to use that ability. Looking at his own hand, Mord comments that the talents of his body are better than he imagined because he can see someone using an ability and already replicate it. The Archduke is extremely pleased, saying that this is expected of someone of his blood, and hearing this, Mord becomes irritated, remembering that this man uses people. Werners, brimming with pride, comments that he will reward his son since he passed the test, then asks what the young man desires. The nobleman says the boy could have wealth beyond imagination or a mentor to train him, and he could ask for anything. Our protagonist is momentarily confused, noting that she never expected something like this, but she already knew what to ask for. She just needs to collect the world fragments before Aiden does, as that's what's necessary to prevent the world's destruction. The boy replies that he doesn't want such trivial things, and his father then asks what his wish is. Surprising everyone, Mord says he wants to challenge the tomb with the god of combat. Taesum explained that there are places called dungeons in the novel. They are dangerous and filled with monsters. The dungeons in this world are a bit different because they have signs of erosion from other worlds. In other words, dungeons form where this world and another overlap. Almost all dungeons overlap with the demon realm, but the tomb with the god of combat is said to be where the god of combat Vernars was created. This place has an overlap with another world, and it's where one of the world fragments is located. Upon hearing his son's request, the Archduke becomes extremely serious and remains silent for a few seconds. He places his hand on his chin, continuing to ponder it, and our protagonist wonders if he asked for it too soon. His father asks what the boy's reason is for wanting to go to that place, since there doesn't seem to be a clear motive. The boy gives the excuse that he heard there are traces of the god of combat Werners there, and he wants to see with his own eyes the source of the lineage he acquired upon awakening. Kessner, who was the boy's opponent earlier, says that this boy is more immature than he thought. He explains that the tomb of the god of combat is the place where the coming-of-age ceremony is held for those of the direct bloodline. And what he's asking for is basically a challenge to the direct bloodline, and a bastard child shouldn't be allowed to go to that place. Unexpectedly, Wernars agrees, and Kessner questions why his master would allow it, but the Archduke says he already knows what his subordinate is thinking. He explains that there have been many instances where someone outside the bloodline went to the dungeon for the sake of an expedition, and this has happened in every generation. Werner asks if his subordinate also wants to go. However, the man says nothing and remains silent. Werner thinks that Kestner has lived a miserable life just for being a bastard child, and he's sure that both Mord and Kestner also want to taste the privileges. However, he tells our protagonist that it's too early for the boy to go, but he'll give him a chance when he becomes an official warrior. Clenching his fists, Mord thinks that becoming an official warrior isn't too difficult, but he needs to be faster than the protagonist of the novel Aiden and obtain the fragment from the tomb of the god of combat. With confidence and hope for a promising future, the boy confirms to his father, stating that he understands. Kester, who had just fought against our protagonist, watches the boy leaving with his instructor, remaining silent. The blond man asks his master if the boy's name was Mord. However, ignoring his question and surprising him, Werner asks what he thought of the boy given that he had fought against him. The man explains that it seemed like Mord was hiding a lot because he was certain the boy hadn't given his all in the fight. Werner, hearing this, responds that it seemed like Mord had given his all to hold back the impulse sphere and had also learned that ability the moment he received it. Kestner acknowledges that he knew there were people who could learn things quickly. However, the thing that shocked him most about the young man was the amount of mana he possessed, as even though he didn't yet know how to control it, the boy's mana level was astonishing. The Archu comments that Mord's mana had a resemblance to that of Erna. Hank was about to say something more, but suddenly stops. Kestner asks what his master was going to say, but the man remains silent, then dismisses it, saying it was nothing. Werner thinks that the boy's gaze lacked any desire and was almost lifeless. The eyes of his bastard children were always full of the desire to be recognized by their father, but his were different. Smiling, the old man remarks that the boy reminds him a lot of his mother, Rena, and that he was an extremely interesting child. Back at the third-level training center, several warriors are seen dueling with each other. Morn arrives and takes the opportunity to observe the fight happening among his teammates. The young man thinks that he nearly died of boredom over the past 4 days, but now will finally learn something useful and worthwhile. He turns his attention to a conversation where a background character mentions hearing that the Werners are going to select 5 of the bastard children to challenge the tomb of the god of combat. A brown-haired boy says that apparently this is an expedition to discover a pattern in the tomb of the god of combat since the pattern changes every time. Hearing all this, Mord thinks that Kestner has also decided to try facing the tomb of the god of combat, and he needs to hurry to become a warrior. Daisley arrives at the scene asking if everyone is present, and a background character responds that everyone is there except Fian. Imposingly, the instructor commands all the students to prepare for training. After saying this, the man walks over to our protagonist, asking if he's the novice, and the boy promptly responds that he is. The elder remarks that Mord cannot participate in this training because it's his first day, and that he should ask his peers for help in learning what has already been taught. Werners becomes irritated, questioning why his instructor doesn't want to teach him since he doesn't want to learn from other students. Daisley, enraged, comments that the young man is giving orders right after beating Captain Fian on his first day, and the boy retorts that he has already been punished for what he did. However, this does not calm the situation, making the instructor even more furious. He orders the boy to stop talking back, questioning if this is how he was taught to behave. Mord maintains a firm expression, saying that Daisley should misunderstand since he's only speaking the truth, and it's the instructor's duty to listen. The instructor cannot tolerate being answered back and, consumed by fury, strikes our protagonist. After Mord steps back slightly from the blow, the old man seizes the opportunity and grabs the boy by the collar, calling him a brat and asserting that he's giving him an order. The instructor orders the boy to run laps around the center until the training ends and expects him to maintain high speed while paying attention to the lessons. With this, the instructor begins to laugh with a psychopathic expression, stating that the boy will be punished if he fails to answer any questions. Mord tries to restrain himself but lets a bit of mana leak out as he clenches his fists in anger at the humiliation he's experiencing. Seeing this and realizing that once again his authority is being challenged, the elder loses control. The old man thinks that this brat dares to disrespect his authority as an instructor. This was unacceptable, and then the old man struck our protagonist again while saying that he was mocking his own instructor. Mord became extremely furious but tried to contain his anger, and at that moment the old man began to lecture him, asserting that the instructor's authority was absolute there. And if the boy continued to resist, he would be removed as a student, immediately asking Mord if he had understood everything. Wiping the blood from his mouth after taking the old man's blow, the boy began cursing him in his mind and wondered if he should hit him. However, he changed his mind, thinking that if he caused another fight there, it could interfere with his test to become an official warrior. And for that reason, he needed to hold back so he could go to the tomb of the god of war. So the young man responded that he understood, addressing the old man as Sir. Seeing that his authority was restored, Daisley questioned what the boy was doing because he should be running. And even though he was silent, swallowing all the anger he was feeling, our protagonist began to run as his instructor had ordered. Watching the back of the student who had defied him, the instructor thought he would ensure the young man was punished for disrespecting him. Our protagonist explains that during the time that passed after that event, Daisley seemed to hold a grudge for what happened and continued to punish him for no reason. It became apparent that the boy was constantly being assaulted by the old man. The boy also stated that Daisley had gone mad with the authority he had and let it completely go to his head. If he felt that his authority was being even minimally threatened, he would punish anyone verbally and physically without feeling pain or remorse. And he always imposed punishment in the form of training for all the students. And because of that, no one could resist since it was something he could do. This was how Daisley governed that place, the third level of the Vernar warriors. After a few days, Mord could be seen doing an exercise using only one finger. However, even then, the instructor kept complaining, questioning if he was disobeying his own instructor. The young man thought he knew why his instructor was doing that, as it was just because Mord had used mana in front of the other apprentices that time. Seeing that he wouldn't get a response, Daisley left in anger, realizing that the boy wouldn't answer no matter what he asked. But the man stated that the boy should remain in that position until the end of the day, and if he moved a muscle, he would be punished again. While doing the exercise, Mord thought he held back because he believed the old man had something valuable to teach, but it seemed he was just passing on mediocre training. Inside his quarters, Daisley was sitting, thinking deeply, resting his chin on his arm. The man cursed Mord, wondering how that brat dared to talk back to him, and the punishment he gave the boy should have destroyed anyone's body. But Mord endured until the end, as if he wanted to rebel one day, practically challenging his authority. The man wondered how a bastard child with no training could be so strong, and then he punched the wall. Getting up, he then stated that the boy would fall soon. He would make sure of it with his own hands. The next day, we hear the protagonist saying that he will take the test to become an official warrior. He is staring at an instructor while the other cadets are shocked at what he's just said. The confused old man asks if he is sure about what he just said, and our hero just firmly confirms it. He's immediately reprimanded by the old man, who says he has never learned anything to become a warrior. But that doesn't intimidate Kim, who says it's because the instructor neglected his job. Then he approaches him and says that in reality, the old man is not qualified to teach. This irritates an elder, who tells him to stop talking nonsense as he is the only one who judges who can take the test or not. But while the old man continues to complain, the protagonist gives a malicious smile, saying that he can't say that, and that he officially challenges the instructor Daisley to a combat god's spirit. Upon hearing what the young man just proposed, the old man begins to be in shock, remembering that the spirit of the combat god refers to the secret practice of duels. And since all those with great powers also follow barbaric traditions, this duel simply means that the strong one is right. They believe that the combat god gives his blessings only to true warriors, meaning that the duel's winner is always the one who is right. Soon the old man questions how the protagonist knows this, but he says it doesn't matter and that, according to the laws of Vernars, an apprentice can request the combat god's spirit from an instructor. In fact, this came from a legend where the combat god grew up without knowing his true abilities, as when he was younger, he was harassed by powerful beings. Soon after he took the throne, he told all his descendants that those who dictate over others must have the necessary ability for it. Therefore, in Vernar's laws, it is allowed for apprentices to challenge instructors for the combat god's spirit. The protagonist thinks the old man was crazy when he considered this, but now will dare to use it in his favor. However, soon Daisley grabs his collar and says he is just a child to be asking for this, and that he is too young to talk about such an important sacred right. But the protagonist quickly tells him to shut up and not to fool himself, since he does not have the right to deny the combat god's spirit. He then lets go of the instructor's hands and slowly walks away from him, while his back is being watched by the same. The protagonist then prepares to do something with his mana, and shouts for everyone to hear that apprentice Mord requires the combat god's spirit to duel against third-level instructor Daisley. He repeats this message as a shout that echoes throughout the palace so that everyone can hear what is happening. But this displeases the instructor. However, before he can say anything, the protagonist turns around, telling him not even to think about denying his request. But if he plans to do so, he will spread to everyone that he ran away from a disciple. Daisley gets irritated by the brat's presumptuous actions, but our hero remains firm and asks if he still hasn't understood what is happening, and that this is his last chance to prove himself a true instructor, warning the old man that he no longer wants to waste time with useless people like him. Feeling the pressure the young man is emanating, the instructor begins to think he should have come wearing brown pants, and that it seems he didn't show all his power when he faced Fian, thinking that now he can't hold back, and even if he is talented, he is still just a child. Daisley then says that he will regret acting like this and begins to prepare the day of the duel, but before he finishes his sentence, he is interrupted by the protagonist, who explains that the challenger is the one who chooses the time and place, and that the duel will be held in the same place in 1 hour, since he doesn't want to waste time with useless people like the instructor. And as he begins to walk away, he says he won't stop him if he wants to flee, completely scaring the instructor, who wonders where this psychopath came from. A little further from the training ground, the protagonist's shout echoes, making the blond man standing by the window curious about an apprentice requesting the combat god's spirit against an instructor. The man knew he wasn't an ordinary child, but he never imagined he could entertain him in this way. Soon he calls his servant, who promptly responds and says they will go to the third-level training center. Then we discover that the man is the one he faced a few days ago. Heading to the training center, we notice a lot of movement with two other people in the middle of a hall. The protagonist seems very calm while the people around wonder if this is the guy who requested the combat god's spirit. Then we also see instructor Daisy, fully prepared and equipped with weapons, shields, and even armor. Mord approaches, saying that he really chose to fight instead of fleeing, and is answered by the instructor, who says he will take that arrogance out of him by force. But this threat ends up being in vain, as the MC says that a barking dog doesn't bite. This makes the instructor even more irritated by the young man's insolence, while he just smiles calmly. Suddenly someone arrives, asking if they are late and saying they thought they wouldn't make it in time. Soon both realize it's Mr. Kessner, and they question why he's there. The problem is that hearing the protagonist speak so calmly to the official makes the instructor suspicious. Realizing that the boy knows this official and confirming that he wasn't being arrogant for no reason, as he is supported by someone powerful. Kessner says he heard about what was going to happen there and then asks what he is planning by requesting the combat god's spirit. He is soon answered by Mord, who says that the man is neglecting his role and seems to only have malicious thoughts in his mind. This makes Kessner chuckle slightly as he finds the protagonist amusing. He then asks if our hero really thinks he will win and says that even though the instructor is retired, he shouldn't be underestimated. The old man also speaks up and says he will beat the protagonist until he begs for forgiveness, but that the fight shouldn't start yet since the witness he called hasn't arrived. However, Kessner quickly asks the instructor if he could be the new witness, as the other hasn't shown up yet. Upon hearing that, people in training center start wondering why Mr. Kessner wants to be the witness for this boy. Even the instructor is confused and is asked by the blonde man if he thinks he's not qualified for the role. This startles the old man, who quickly backtracks, saying that Kessner is a busy man and so on. But hearing the man address him informally, the blonde man questions whether the instructor is disrespecting him and warns not to confuse respect with weakness. This makes the old man apologize and bow his head quickly. But of course, someone as proud as he is wouldn't be happy about being humiliated. The protagonist then apologizes for interrupting and says it's almost time, prompting Mr. Kessner to ask what he's talking about. But he soon understands the situation and wishes the boy good luck, hoping he didn't come all the way for nothing. Mord then tells the instructor that it's time to start, and the old man, still angry from being humiliated so many times, also wishes to be in the fight. He says that the protagonist managed to surpass Fian's momentum with just his body reinforcement. But while preparing an aura on his sword, he says that Mord will regret it if that's all he has. This makes our hero get a little more serious. The old man then continues, saying he wants to see if Mord can also block a sword with that momentum. But before he can do anything, the protagonist says he's funny, leaving Daisy confused. While preparing his aura, Mord says he's completely wrong, and asks if he really thinks an apprentice would challenge an instructor with just that. Then he shows his aura spreading across his entire body while looking confident in the fight. This makes the old man realize that Mord is using body impulse and wonders when he learned that. But before he can continue his line of thought, the protagonist quickly advances, gathering all of his aura into his fist to throw a punch. But the confident old man says it won't change a thing, and soon the two attacks collide, causing a powerful shockwave. However, the protagonist's fist ends up winning, shocking the old man, who realizes the attack is coming his way. And soon he's hit by our hero's strength, being thrown backward, where he uses all the strength in his legs to stop, becoming extremely confused, wondering how Mord pierced through his attack and sent him flying. But once again, the protagonist advances, already preparing a new attack. This time is blocked by the instructor's shield. He admits that our hero is good, but that he won't be able to defeat him with those skills. Soon, Mord notices something coming his way. Then the instructor uses his impulse on the shield, sending a wave of mana that throws our MC backward. As he says that despite being strong, he still lacks experience, and that he has no deep knowledge of mana techniques. That's why he is too young to fight someone like him, who carries great experience, attacking our hero, who barely manages to dodge. But his dodge wasn't perfect, and a small part of his cheek ends up getting cut. Realizing the situation is getting worse for the protagonist, the instructor says that he has survived many battles and near-death situations. So someone as weak as him daring to challenge an elder is practically a death sentence, and that he is not a bastard child like Mord, who could be underestimated. With the last attack, the instructor throws the MC far away. He manages to stay on his feet, but is now much more cautious. He knows the old man is right about having more experience. And the blonde man watching the fight says that although the boy is talented, his combat skills are still those of a novice. If he loses here, he will have to leave, and that's exactly what Daisy wants. So he wonders what the young hero will do now. Back in the fight, the instructor asks if a cat got the protagonist's tongue. But Mord just approaches, saying that even though the instructor is a jerk, his skills aren't bad, impressing the old man with his arrogance. Even so, Mord remains cold and says that if the instructor thinks he will lose, then it's clear he's an unqualified instructor. But the old man just laughs, saying he will train him right here and now. However, the MC says that's impossible, startling the elder, who wonders where all this energy came from. Looking closely at the protagonist, he notices some changes in his physique, in addition to the aura emanating from him. When he realizes that the young man now has completely white hair, the instructor instantly knows he has lost, since his divine blood has been unlocked. Our hero just opens his eyes, determined to finish off this old man. And as he approaches, the elder is now absolutely certain that he should have come to this battle wearing brown pants. Mord says this is the first time he's fought like this, and he doesn't think he will be able to hold back, so it's better for him not to be resentful when he dies and becomes a ghost. After going through the divine blood awakening at 15 years old, those who belong to the Vernar's lineage can use the powers of divine blood. However, most of them stop using the divine blood powers to increase their mana storage, and this allows them to gain incredible powers. But if someone exists who can fully control the divine blood, that person will gain incomparable power. The people watching the scene in the training room are shocked, wondering if the protagonist is really only 15 years old. Even Kessner is impressed at how a 15-year-old boy managed to awaken the powers of divine blood. And although he was considered the most talented among several boys, it took him 4 years to awaken it. Yet this young man who arrived just 8 days ago has already reached this level. Instructor Gaisley is also beginning to soil his pants because when he looks into the boy's silver eyes, he is certain that he has awakened the blood. As the protagonist throws his superior instinct aura all around, he finds it unbelievable. Mord then tries to show a little mercy and says that if he wants to give up, he can do so and will only lose his pride. But the instructor shouts, telling him not to talk nonsense, because even if he managed to awaken the divine powers, there's no way he would lose to a novice. However, before he finishes speaking, the protagonist quickly approaches, telling him not to regret this later. But this attack is something the old man anticipated, and he is fully confident he can defend it. So if he puts his shield in front of the protagonist's blow, saying it will have no effect. But the opposite happens as he is sent flying with just one hand movement from our hero, falling violently to the ground as he is dragged across the dirt. Suddenly, it hits him, and the old man realizes that this is the power of divine blood. Mord wonders if his attack was too strong as he still can't control it properly, while the old man is certain he just lost to a 15-year-old boy. Even so, he maintains his pride, and despite his injured shoulder, he doesn't let himself be defeated. He then begins to use all of his impulse in the sword, preparing a desperate final attack, charging towards the protagonist and preparing an attack strong enough to eliminate him. But before he can even make a move with his sword, our hero is already close, telling him to drop that pride. Then incredibly, the old man manages to dodge the attack, moving behind him, while shouting for him not to lower his guard, saying that no matter how strong he thinks he is, when it comes to combat technique, he's far superior. A large explosion is seen after the elder's attack, earning praise even from Kessner, who finds it incredible that he managed to turn the situation around. However, the most powerful weapon and shield of the Vernars are their own bodies, and soon we realize that the sword imbued with impulse wasn't even enough to scratch the protagonist's body, since it won't hurt someone in their divine powers. In that moment, Instructor Gaisley felt true terror, as he realized that the sword he had trained with for decades was doing nothing against a 15-year-old boy. He then starts swinging it frantically in all directions, finding it impossible. But our hero just stands there, receiving the attacks. He soon says that he's disappointed, because not only is he weak, but he also wanted to act like the greatest of all. Upon hearing this, Gaisley gets irritated, preparing another attack with all his strength. But with bare hands, the protagonist stops the sword's movement, and explains that those who are descendants of the god of combat fight with their own hands because there is no weapon stronger than their physique. He then asks if the instructor really thought such an attack would hurt him, while gripping the old man's sword even tighter, and then releases an electric shock using his divine power, making the old man writhe in pain from the shock of over 1,000,000 volts. The elderly man then falls to his knees before the protagonist, and looking down at him, Mord asks if he's in shock and tells him to accept his defeat or else he swears he will eliminate him right there and then. Gaisley, who's not only in shock but also soiled his pants, is now terrified of that boy, realizing that from the beginning, he was never able to win against this incomparable power. He then lowers his head coldly and accepts his defeat before our hero. At that same moment, the crowd watching the battle begins to shout that the son of Vernars defeated Gaisley. Even the blonde man finds it impressive how a bastard son who awakened the divine blood managed to use the blood powers. Not only that, but he nearly killed his instructor in the combat god's spirit duel, so he has no idea how strong he might become. And as he watches the protagonist walking away towards a gate, he remarks that it was a good battle. In the distance, we observe 2 other people who were spying on the battle. The hooded one says that boy was incredible and mentions having heard that he was quite brave and unafraid of being defeated. We then discover that the hooded person is a beautiful woman named Erna of Vernars, 7th in the direct lineage of the Vernars. Let's now go to the castle of Archduke Vernars. There the old man remains seated on the throne while observing the protagonist. He says that the young man became an official warrior and even easily won the duel against Mr. Gaisley. Mord simply confirms this and says he's there to collect what was promised him. Then the Lord asks if he only requested the combat god's spirit to become a warrior faster, to which the protagonist responds that he actually couldn't stand by while his instructor neglected his role. The patriarch then approaches, saying that the strong are always right, and that's the motto of the Vernars. That's why he sees no problem with his actions. But what piques his curiosity is why he hid his powers before. Our hero explains that he was being cautious with the use of mana and impulse because he didn't know how to control them, as it was his first time using both. The patriarch finds that explanation reasonable. He's sure the protagonist came there just to challenge the combat god's tomb, and the latter affirms this. However, one of the guards present advises him to reconsider his choice a bit, as allowing him to challenge the tomb before the announcement will make some people complain. But upon hearing a subordinate try and give his opinion, the patriarch becomes completely irritated, asking how he dares suggest that he rethink his decision. The man quickly asks for forgiveness from his lord while thinking he should have come wearing brown pants. He explains that a promise is a debt. Subandi allows the protagonist to challenge the combat god's tomb, though he doesn't know why he wants to do so. Mord then kneels, thanking the lord for this decision, while giving a small smirk knowing he achieved his goal and will finally collect the first fragment of the world. The two then arrive at the entrance of the combat god's tomb. We see that the one accompanying the protagonist is Kestner, and he says that only one person can enter at a time and another can only enter when the previous one dies. Mord thinks that it's bigger than he expected and that he only knew the combat god's tomb was in the Archduke's basement but didn't know it was like this. And soon the blonde man says he can't believe Mord will be the first to challenge it. He adds that all of this is a result of what Mord has done, so he must ensure he returns alive. Mord begins approaching the gate, thanking his instructor, but before entering he stops in front of it because just standing in front of this thing is giving him chills. According to the myth of the Vernars Archduchy, the combat god Vernars had never encountered death. Instead, he merely abandoned his human destiny and became a god. The name combat god's tomb is just a name Vernars gave it with a different meaning. Mord then remembers a phrase he read in the novel, which said that divine human remains inhabit this place. Finally, he opens the door and is met with a bright light. As he approaches, he knows that in 7 years, Aiden will obtain the first fragment of the world and that he will also need an assistant. However, at this time, the fragment of the world should still be inside. And soon the gate closes, locking the protagonist in that space. As he walks further into the place, he comes across various extremely bizarre structures. He is startled because it's completely different from what was described in the novel. He knows that the combat god's tomb has 6 spatial sketches, but the one described in the novel was only one of those 6. And no matter which one it is, they should all have a seal. So he only needs to find it. The seal should be a stone statue representing the life of the combat god, but soon we realize that something's watching him. After walking for a while, he remarks that nothing in that place seems realistic. In fact, it looks like someone made it in Photoshop and only halfway done at that. But soon something catches his attention as he notices smoke and fire coming from somewhere, realizing that it's hellhounds ready to attack him. Moreover, there are 2 of them, and our protagonist seems cornered as the rabid dogs watch him. Mord, who thought he wouldn't have to face so many monsters, feels a little disappointed, and soon he sees one hellhound charging at him. But with a quick strike, he neutralizes the first hellhound, immediately preparing to go after the second. However, he doesn't even mean to get close since he uses his mana to separate its lower half from the upper half. As he continues searching for the statues, he remarks that it's unnecessarily exhausting. Soon he seems to reach his destination and finally finds the hidden seal. He sees a statue that appears to be the combat god defeating Etten in his youth, but he doesn't understand why it was turned into a seal. He comments that for him to have placed the statue like that, it seems he had a lot of self-love and must also be the man standing on top of the creature. The protagonist then begins to spread his mana around, and with just one leap, he jumps to the top of the statue, landing skillfully there, and he comes face to face with the statue of the ancestor. Upon observing the statue, he realizes that it's meant to be Werner's at 10 years old and understands why all his descendants seem like they overindulged in the juice. Mord quickly activates the combat god's blood and makes a small cut on his arm. He then approaches the statue of the founder and pours some of his blood onto the statue, thinking that it would have been difficult to find if he hadn't had a hint. And who would have imagined that after awakening the divine blood, one would have to place some on the combat god's statue? Then he quickly jumps down from the giant statue and thinks he should be glad to be the first to do this. But he needs to hurry and move on to the next seal. However, as he is leaving, we notice that the statue is now staring at him, and its skull seems to be cracking. Sometime later, we see that the protagonist has come a long way, having faced giant snakes, hellhounds, skeletons in armor, and various other monsters. In fact, he is now finishing off one of the skeletons. Yet these monsters continue to appear out of nowhere. He thinks that since the place he's in is just an alley, there's no way to avoid them. As the giant snake attacks him, he thinks it would make more sense for the combat god's test to be more straightforward. He then begins to condense his mana into his fist, deciding to finish off all the enemies that appear along the way. He believes this must be the type of test the combat god is proposing. Some flying monsters observe our hero from the top, but he realizes that these monsters are actually guarding the top of the wall to prevent him from climbing. At least he won't have to worry about fighting them on the ground. At this point, he has already found 5 of the seals, and now there's only 1 left. Then he will finally be able to acquire the fragment of the world. As he advances, he feels more mana, and perhaps because he has awakened the divine blood 5 times, he's also running low on mana. But something catches his attention, making him stop. Mord looks up with a serious gaze. It seems he has finally reached the 6th seal, a giant stone dragon. Like the others, this statue is very large, and it looks like it's going to be a challenge to climb. But before he does anything, a noise catches his attention. When he looks back, he sees a huge blue ogre staring at him. He immediately assumes a battle stance. Knowing this is a monster that even magical impulse fighters would have difficulty with, the blue ogre roars and prepares to charge our hero, slamming its fist into the ground in an instant, completely cracking the floor. However, Mord quickly dodges the ogre's attack, realizing that this isn't an ordinary monster since the average height of an ogre is 4 meters. But the monster in front of him is definitely over 5 meters tall. The battle continues with the blue giant trying to hit the protagonist, while Mord uses all his speed to dodge the attacks. As he prepares to counterattack, he thinks it was too easy to be true, and that it will be much more interesting to fight this monster. Mord then begins to unleash a flurry of attacks on the ogre, even managing to push the blue monster back. However, while distracted, the ogre grabs him in midair and throws him against a wall right after, causing significant damage to the protagonist's body. At that moment, he realizes he won't be able to defeat it with just an impulse. He sees the massive creature running towards him, throwing its fist back, preparing for an attack. And at that moment, he accepts that he will have to use that technique. But maybe it's already too late, as the ogre hits the protagonist squarely, feeling victorious after easily defeating the boy who was its enemy. But then the ogre is surprised by an explosion from the crater it created. The protagonist speaks, saying that he's just a rookie with good genetics. The explosion sends the ogre flying several meters back. We then see that the protagonist activated his superior instinct, knowing that if he had taken any longer, he would have died. The furious ogre gets up, ready for round 2. But what it didn't expect was the protagonist charging a massive energy sphere in his fist. As Mord tells the blue giant to shut up, he delivers a blow that explodes the entire area around them, completely obliterating the ogre. Even though he won, Mord feels a little disappointed that he had to activate the divine blood to win. He thought he could defeat it without using it. Mord then walks away from his enemy, thinking that this dungeon is used by 15-year-old boys from the direct lineage, and that it seems battle knowledge and physical training really make a difference. That's why as soon as he leaves, he's going to start everything from scratch. He then reaches the top of the stone dragon and looks at the combat god, thinking there's something wrong with his height. Since his father is 25 meters tall, the combat god, who is supposed to be his ancestor, should be a little taller than that. But the truth is, it doesn't really matter. He pours some of his blood on the statue, trying to attain the fragment of the world. But some time passes and absolutely nothing happens. Mord begins to think something went wrong, as according to the novel, he should have gained a fragment of the world after activating all the statues. And he thinks that maybe he forgot a seal, so he decides to retrace his steps and find each one. But suddenly, he hears a voice saying it's disappointed and that it expected its descendants to be a little stronger. When he turns around, he finds himself face to face with a mysterious man staring at him. We soon realize that the man is the statue of the combat god, now brought to life, and he says that if he had been left there, he would have been sad about his descendant. The reason our hero decided to enter the combat god's tomb is because he remembers the protagonist from the novel obtaining a fragment of the world inside. However, the only thing he's seeing is a moving and talking statue. Our hero wonders if this is some kind of hidden text. He then asks the man who he is, but the man ignores him, instead asking how old Mord is. But as Mord activates his superior instinct, he remains determined to find out who this man is, which impresses the elder. The protagonist quickly charges in, delivering a punch that causes a powerful shockwave. However, the attack doesn't affect the man at all, who simply says that Mord is overstepping his limits. He immediately counterattacks, throwing the protagonist backward, causing him to crash into a wall, leaving him a bit confused about what just happened. But then he sees the massive figure leaping toward him, saying it's time to give him a proper welcome. Mord receives a punch straight to his stomach, launching him into the ground like a cannonball. The impact is so strong that it kicks up a massive cloud of dust. Soon we see the protagonist emerging from the crater slightly battered, as he wonders if he's experiencing some kind of illusion, since this was just a stone statue a few seconds ago. The old man then asks if Mord truly doesn't know who he is, while the protagonist responds, saying he knows he's the stone statue of the combat god. But the man quickly explains that he isn't exactly a stone statue, but rather the human shadow that the combat god left behind. Upon hearing this, our hero was shocked, as it was mentioned in the novel that the combat god's tomb contained his human remains. And this means the tomb was meant for his human form, not his divine one. However, the novel said that the statues represented achievements in his life, and it probably means they were also imbued with his will. The elder says that although it's hard to believe, it's the truth. But you will show Mord a bit of his power to make him truly believe. The protagonist then sees only a shadow of a hand approaching. while the elder says that reality checks are called shocks because they hurt for real. He delivers a punch to his descendant, who barely manages to defend himself. Excited, the elder says the protagonist is weaker than he had imagined. But our hero does a retreat and begins to prepare his Saitama punch, which excites the ancestor, who is thrilled that Mord has the energy to fight him. Mord then throws a straight punch, but the hero dodges and moves into the elder's blind spot, impressing the old man with the young man's speed. While Mord prepares an attack powerful enough to kill him, he charges a Kamehameha imbue with his mana. However, the truth is that the elder seems disappointed that he used such a trick, effortlessly slapping the condensed energy sphere away as it approaches. Mord takes advantage of the smoke caused by the explosion to strike the old man, surprising him that the impulse ball was fake. But in the next instant, the old man grabs the boy by the head and throws him far away, saying only a weak and foolish person would use such a trick. Even in the air, the man manages to catch up to him, delivering more blows, while psychotically saying he loves hitting people with his bare hands. As Mord takes the hits, he realizes he won't be able to defeat him with divine power alone. He even wonders if he's dreaming, since the power difference between him and the elder is massive. He is then furiously slammed into the ground. While the elder continues to strike, saying that Mord has a long way to go, he suddenly stops with a smile on his face, since the protagonist is already completely beaten. But even so, he delivers a final kick, sending Mord crashing into a wall. The elder then says he's disappointed that the protagonist has such little strength. He explains that if this were a real battle, Mord would already be dead. But even trembling, our hero stands up, saying it's not over yet. However, he becomes alarmed as his divine blood power suddenly stops working. This disappoints the old man as just a few attacks were enough to stop the protagonist's ability, and he wonders how his descendants became so weak. As he approaches, he asks if this is enough proof that he's telling the truth, while the protagonist questions whether he is really the combat god. But the old man replies that here, Mord can call him Vernars. He adds that he has seen many descendants face this dungeon, but Mord is the first to awaken in this way. However, when Vernars learns that 500 years have passed until someone managed to awaken, the old man is incredulous that so much time has passed. He says it doesn't make sense since it's not something that should have been that difficult to resolve. Mord explains that after he ascended to the heavens, 2 of his sons got into a conflict, each claiming to be the successor of the combat god, and the loser took his subordinates and left. The old Hulk never imagined it would cause so many problems once he left. He then looks at the protagonist a bit disappointed, saying he shouldn't have revealed this side of himself to the young man. He then turns and asks if the young man has any idea what awakening truly means. With conviction, our protagonist says he has no idea. Hearing this, the old man can't believe it and asks why he put his blood on the statues then. The protagonist responds that he was searching for the fragment of the world. In the novel, when Aiden obtained the fragment, the combat god didn't appear, so he figures that the god only awakened because the blood Mord placed was from his direct lineage. The old man then explains that the meaning of the awakening and the reason he left the shadow behind is to teach about the personification of divine blood. This puts the protagonist on high alert, imagining that the old man is about to teach him how to fully use his blood and power. Mord quickly questions why this knowledge wasn't passed down to future generations, but the old man explains that there's a problem. The first generation that learned wouldn't have been able to pass it on to the second. Since the talent to use divine blood is proportional to the concentration of that blood, this means that with each passing generation, the blood becomes weaker. In other words, the more generations, the harder it becomes to improve, and if someone appears who can't master it, they will have a serious problem. That's why the combat god's tomb was created. It's a training ground for descendants and a teaching method, since once you can personify the blood and reach this stage, you'll be able to use divine power perfectly. Our hero knows that compared to 500 years ago, the blood is diluted significantly, and the reason the Archduke is the villain is because he broke a taboo caused by this limitation. And although things have gotten a bit more complicated, Mord now has the chance to learn overpowered skill, so he'll have to start training with this old man. Mord eagerly says that if it's training, he'll be happy to do it, and asks how Vernars will teach him. But as you can imagine, this old man isn't likely to be a good teacher, so the training method will be simple. They will just fight, and fight nonstop. Upon hearing this reckless training method, our hero begins to feel disappointed. The old man then sarcastically asks if people today get everything handed to them on a silver platter. But obviously, our hero is just afraid of dying, since he recently broke 4 ribs. However, with a malicious grin, the old man says it probably doesn't hurt anymore. When the protagonist checks, the pain really is gone. The old man then shares 2 pieces of good news. First, while he's in this place, all injuries and mana regenerate immediately. And second, he won't be the one facing Mord. This makes our hero curious about who his opponent will be. In the next moment, an enormous wave of destruction erupts from the statue, startling the protagonist and disappointing the old man, who says that this god always likes to show off. Soon we see a younger version of the combat god, who looks at the protagonist with disdain and questions if this is really the one he has to train. Mord knows that this young version is the combat god at 10 years old, and since his hair is in silver, he likely hasn't reached the power level to fully use the divine blood. This is in contrast to the old man, who not only has completely white hair but also gray eyes. The old ancestor instructs his descendant to endure as long as possible, while the younger combat god taunts, saying that Mord won't even land a punch on him. He adds that it will be embarrassing to lose to a 10-year-old, frightening the protagonist. But our hero, who is also at the peak of his 15 years, doesn't back down and asks if he came to fight or talk, and that empty vessels are the ones that make the most noise, so instead of talking so much, he should shut up and start battling. Our protagonist says this because he thinks his physique is better than the young man's. However, the young man responds that he won't use divine blood, since if he does, our hero will die. But these words end up irritating Mord. He charges at the kid, hoping those words aren't lies. However, sometime later he finds out it wasn't a lie. Since he ends up face down on the ground, unable to last 10 seconds in the fight, both realize that he is only strong physically and has no fighting experience, so they will have to teach him from the basics. Mord then asks how one of his descendants doesn't know how to fight, but the protagonist says he never learned. This leaves the old man confused about how one of his firstborns doesn't know how to fight. But soon the protagonist explains everything that happened and how the Archduke was distributing his genes. Upon hearing how things are, the old man becomes dissatisfied and says that if he could leave, he would give the Archduke a beating. He extends his hand to the protagonist and says he'll give him a tip on how to beat the 10-year-old. The old man explains that the protagonist keeps getting hit by the same attack pattern, and that to overcome this pattern, he must use the arrogance of the young god of combat. Meanwhile, the kid yawns and says that two adults want to beat up a child, and that's shameful. But our hero, who is only 15, starts to get irritated. And so the 11th round begins. Our protagonist tries all possible patterns to hit the young one, looking for an opportunity to attack and turn the tables. But the outcome is always the same, and he keeps getting beaten as he searches for the opportunity. 74 rounds have already passed, and he continues to charge fiercely. But the young one just dodges his attacks as if they were nothing, even dodging the protagonist's surprise attacks, and counterattacking immediately afterward. The kick was so strong that it undid the divine blood transformation. And while the protagonist was wiping the dirt from his nose, he ends up getting punched right in the mouth. But actually, the punch hit the wall next to him. And the 10-year-old god of combat wonders if he got scared, or if the cat got his tongue since he's all mad about losing again. But the protagonist ends up noticing something, a small cut on the young one's cheek, indicating that his attack worked and that he managed to touch him. The battles continue, and the old god of combat keeps helping the protagonist, until a moment comes when he can see the next moves of the 10-year-old god of combat and how he's going to counterattack. The protagonist then leaps forward and lands an attack as if a meteor shower were crashing down, burying the 10-year-old god of combat's head in the ground. Both the old man and the protagonist are happy since he finally landed a punch on him. However, at that moment he sees a spark of lightning, and soon a hand emerges from the smoke. But before it hits him, our protagonist manages to move away. Then he hears the young one saying that he seems to be learning. So now he doesn't mean to hold back anymore. We then realize that the god of combat is quite resentful, especially because it's the first time he's seen his own blood, and also because he had never been hit by anyone before. For this reason, he decides to stop holding back and charges for real. And just trying to block the young one's attack drives the protagonist backward, realizing that if the fight continues like this, things could get ugly, and even his body might end up torn apart. He then jumps back to try to escape, while wondering why the god of combat isn't trying to stop him. And it seems that the silky-haired old man doesn't care about what happens to him. The younger one then approaches, asking if he thinks he has time to be looking elsewhere, and soon delivers a blow to our hero's abdomen, which throws him far back, making him crash into a rock, even managing to get a little ketchup out of our protagonist, and looking extremely happy with a sadistic smile. Without giving the boy time to recover, the naked one charges again. And our hero, who has no time to react, can only see his end approaching, as he receives a barrage of attacks. The 10-year-old god of combat grabs our hero's arm and simply throws him into the air like a rag doll, also jumping right after. In the air, he begins to prepare his final move, kicking him down and making him crash into the ground. At this moment, Mord can no longer use the divine blood. In fact, he can't even move a single finger. However, it is at this moment that he notices something falling in his direction, and when he looks up, it's already too late. A piece of the statue is collapsing on him. Right after the impact, a cloud of dust forms, while the god of combat wonders if our hero is still alive. But incredibly, he manages to raise his fist, making the god of combat admit that he truly has guts to endure all of this. But unfortunately, it seems that's all he has, since his legs have been pinned by the statue. And when he looks down, he realizes he can't move them, automatically panicking. The 10-year-old jumps from the top of the statue, while preparing an attack that will ensure his legs stop hurting. Meanwhile, our protagonist reflects that he can only use the divine blood in at least 8 seconds. Time keeps passing, but he probably won't have enough time to recover, since the attack is practically upon him. But at that moment, he shows all this cunning and says he's curious about something. Then we see something quickly approaching the 10-year-old's eyes and swiftly passing like a line across them. Mord says that the Werner's lineage has terrifying physiques, but wonders if their eyes are as sensitive as normal people's. Soon, the confirmation of his question is evident, as the god of combat's eyes swell up and he can no longer see the protagonist in front of him. However, at that moment, in a fit of rage, he uses the divine blood, as he prepares to truly finish off the protagonist. But before his punch can land, the countdown finally stops, and the god of combat's attack only creates a crater in the ground. Since the protagonist managed to activate his divine blood and dodge, automatically attacking him from behind. When the boy realizes this and looks back, he already sees the protagonist questioning him since he said he would kill him if he awakened the divine blood. But the one who will actually lose this fight is him. Mord then finishes the fight by delivering a solid punch to the kid's face, feeling happy for finally landing a hit. However, reality proves to be much harsher. Or rather, the kid's head proves to be much harder, as the protagonist's punch did absolutely nothing. The 10-year-old then grabs him by the neck and prepares an attack, saying that this is how you really strike, making the protagonist feel disappointed as it seems the boy is too much for his current power. But at that moment, the old man intervenes, ordering him to stop fighting, and soon the protagonist is thrown far away, leaving him confused, wondering what happened. But when he looks forward, he sees the old man's back and realizes that he stopped the younger one's attack with just one hand. He then questions what he's doing, as he told him to teach, not kill. So the training is over. The younger one asks if he would say the same if he were in his place, but the elder just gives a cold stare at his younger self. And like a child who disobeyed his father, the younger one quickly reverts to his normal form and starts agreeing. The protagonist, who is observing all of this, realizes that the younger one is afraid of the elder and is just happy to have survived. But at that moment, he begins to hear an earthquake. And when he looks up, he notices the entire subspace collapsing, while the elder says it's time to differentiate between dream and reality. He explains that the protagonist has divine blood different from his, and it's likely because he's a descendant of Arita, who was also part of the Vernars. In fact, not even the elder knows what this combination will do, as even though he is the son of a goddess, he never imagined someone from the Vernar lineage would have their blood mixed with hers. He then points his finger at the protagonist's head and says he will grant him the blessing of the body of the god of combat as a reward. The protagonist then begins to feel a small energy taking over his body and spreading through every cell of his organism, granting him immense strength. When he looks at his body, he says that he's never seen this appear in the novel. And then the old man says that's all he can do. He hopes to see him again and even telling his younger self to say goodbye, but the younger one seems clearly irritated. However, his attention is caught by the protagonist, who says that he has only faced weaklings so far, but it seems that he's different and believes the current generation can't even reach his level. For this reason, he thanks him for everything he learned. And although the 10-year-old boy has the physique of a man who's been on steroids for 50 years, his personality is still very easy to please, and he becomes quite happy with the protagonist's compliments. Our hero then wakes up lying on the ground, and as he gets up, he wonders if that whole subspace was just a dream. But when he looks forward, he finds his objective, a fragment of the world, a tool used by great ancestral gods to create the world, is right in front of him. This piece is the perfect world that Adam used to gain enormous power and eventually bring this world to its end. Our hero then touches the fragment and begins to absorb its essence, while thinking that since he got it first, now the novel's hero won't be able to become this strong. And even though it's disappointing that the protagonist is losing to a supporting character, it's all for a good happy ending. We then return to the real world, where someone is calling for Lady Erna. The man says that Morn has returned from the tomb of the god of war. The young woman explains that's why she's creating a plan to appear as a cool sister to her adopted little brother. Unlike other families, the candidates for succession in the Vernar's family aren't just the Duke's children, but all the children, whether from the direct bloodline or not. Among them, there are 5 candidates who are at close levels to duel for this position: the 7th, the 6th, the 4th, the 3rd, and the Archduke. But the fact that the protagonist completed the tomb of the god of war caused a massive effect on all of them. We then see a young man drinking tea while mentioning that all the successors are trying to recruit Mord. I bet he can't let such a talented child fall into the wrong hands. We discover that this young man is the 6th child, Vidin. Next, we move to the Archduke's castle, where some servants are showing the protagonist his new residence. His room turns out to be extremely luxurious, and we discover that he has been sent to the first outer region of the castle, where the riches stay. While most common warriors reside in the 2nd region, he was sent to the 3rd, probably because he has Vernar's blood and awakened the divine blood. They even placed him near a training field so he could train. In addition, they assign him 2 servants to carry out his orders, making him happy that he's finally living a noble's life. Suddenly, someone arrives knocking on the door and asking if Mr. Mord is there. But when the servant opens the door to see who it is, she gets startled. However, the 2 men completely ignore her and ask if the protagonist is Mord. We learn that warriors can be divided into 4 ranks from common to specialist. The protagonist starts evaluating the 2 and assumes they are probably intermediate rank. One of them pulls out a scroll and begins reciting the words of his young master Bren, who is impressed by Mord's achievements. He believes that Mord's talents will be of great use and therefore hopes he accepts his proposal to become a warrior, promising good news. The man says that the protagonist should be happy to receive the offer to be his sword. However, he is soon surprised when Mord asks who sent the scroll, since he doesn't remember who this young master of Bran is, and with so many successors in the novel, he can only recall those who survived 7 years later. This petulance from the protagonist angers the two men. They approach the protagonist asking if he's looking for a fight, but then someone asks if he knows young Master Vidin. Apparently, the two men recognize the voice as they turn around scared, and we soon see a blonde man with a scar on his face standing there. Our protagonist realizes from their reaction that this man is probably an intermediate warrior and that Vidin is the 6th young master. The blonde man approaches, saying he's there for the same reason as the two, while explaining that the strongest should gain the protagonist's loyalty. But these words irritate the other warrior, who asks if he's up for a one-on-one fight. However, what the warrior didn't expect was that the blonde man with the beastly look was actually up for a one-on-one fight, inviting him to step outside and settle it. And if the man isn't confident, then he should tuck his tail between his legs and disappear, taking the opportunity to inform him that his young master is a loser. The warrior, unable to do anything, just grits his teeth, while telling Wolves that he'll regret this. Observing the two backing down from the blonde, our protagonist realizes that not all intermediate warriors are on the same level. Soon, the man turns in his direction asking if he is Lord Mord, introducing himself as Wolves while our hero questions whether he should address him as a veteran. But the man says no, since those two idiots were older than him but weaker. The true measure of a warrior is not their age or rank, but their strength. Our hero agrees and says that the reason he came is to try and get him to join Vite inside. Wolves says that's exactly it, and since he's a rising star, he brought this incredible offer. And as he approaches with a menacing look, he warns that he'll do whatever it takes to make him accept following his lord, even if it means using some force. He warns our hero that he might be feeling overconfident after beating some weaklings, but it's time to face reality. Realizing that the blonde man is eager to fight and take him by force, our hero finds it exciting, as it will allow him to see the results of his training. A little while later, the two are outside in the training area. Mord asks if the man won't use some kind of weapon, since he isn't from the Vernar's lineage. But the blonde explains that he doesn't need one as he has something much stronger. He activates an ability in his hand and explains that it's the Impulse Gauntlet. He heard that the protagonist nearly lost to an instructor while using Divine Blood, and this gauntlet is an advanced ability that beginner warriors like him wouldn't be able to replicate. And as he says that the chances of defeating him drop to 0, he's shocked by something. He realizes that the protagonist was able to easily copy his Impulse Gauntlet. Surprised, the blonde asks how he learned it in just 4 days as it seems impossible. But the protagonist quickly charges at him, asking if he really believes that, and that 4 days is plenty of time for him to evolve significantly. The two then begin a fight that is almost invisible due to their speed. But Wolves is having trouble keeping up with our hero's speed, and while he tries to formulate a counterattack plan, he nearly has his head hit by the hero's fist. Now on the ground, incapacitated and scared, the only thought likely running through his head is that he should have come wearing brown pants. With just one punch, the protagonist was able to create a giant crater in the training room. The blonde realizes that he may have become much stronger in these 4 days or that he had been hiding his full strength. However, he tells the protagonist not to underestimate him. And that's exactly what he does. He starts amplifying his mana even more. Looking at him with a superior tone, he says he was just warming up. Wolves begins to lose confidence, saying that there's no way he almost lost to the instructor with this amount of mana, and that even as a Vernar's descendant, it's impossible to have this much mana. That's why he assumes the protagonist was hiding his strength and questions him about this, asking if he was holding back during the fight with Instructor Daisley. Our hero knows he wouldn't believe him if he explained what really happened, and that he truly evolved in 4 days. In reality, this tremendous evolution is due to receiving the blessing of the body of the god of combat, and beyond bringing innate talent to the surface, his physical abilities and mana gradually increase as a result. Furthermore, the Fragment of the World acts as an almost infinite mana source, and although he hasn't used the mana from the Fragment of the World yet, it's amusing to see them react like this when he's not even using his maximum power. The blonde admits that he underestimated him, but now he will fight seriously, since he would like to see the protagonist's true strength. Watching what the man is doing, our hero starts to feel a little scared. As his clothes begin to tear and his hands transform into terrifying claws, along with his jaw that resembles that of a dog with sharp teeth, the protagonist wonders who his mother really is. He remembers that in the novel, there are people who suffer from the full moon curse, and when that day arrives, they transform and start attacking those around them. However, among them there are some who manage to overcome and control their power. This fusion between man and monster is called a lycanthrope, and it seems that Wolves, besides having a name similar to a wolf, is indeed a lycanthrope who perfectly controls his powers. He then casts a bloodthirsty gaze and asks if the protagonist is ready. Watching that sinister transformation, the only thing going through our hero's mind is that the guy just got even bigger. However, he charges into the fight, knowing he has more mana than Wolf's. He throws the first punch, but his punch seems to have no effect, leaving him confused as to why Wolf's wasn't thrown back. The monster says that while the hero's mana is indeed better than his, the difference in their physiques is staggering. The werewolf then begins preparing an attack, and before the protagonist can do anything to defend himself, he's hit squarely by a punch from the giant wolf. He's sent flying backward, crashing into a wall behind him. The impact is so strong that it leaves a crater where the protagonist hit. It even causes some ketchup to spill from his mouth. Realizing that the werewolf is stronger than he imagined, our protagonist still refuses to use his divine blood, as with his greater mana, the fight is still even. He then gets up, asking the wolf what he thinks about ending this. However, the man gets irritated and thinks the protagonist has realized he's going to lose and is trying to end the fight without using divine blood. But the protagonist explains that he doesn't know what will happen if he uses it and fears he might accidentally kill him. This only irritates the werewolf further with such arrogance. So instead of using divine blood, the protagonist decides to use the fragment of the world. While preparing the mana in his heart, he explains that he hasn't used everything he has. He explains that people with the fragment of the world can use it by extracting its mana after completing the tomb with the god of combat. He managed to do this by using a training method he read in the novel. But since he only has one fragment, he can only use the blessing of the body of the god of combat for 20 seconds. But that's enough time to break the imbalance in the fight. Upon realizing the young man has increased his mana even further, the monster says that the protagonist is the real monster. Still, he launches a slicing attack toward the young man. But the protagonist just stands there watching the attack approach. However, with quick movements, he dodges all the slashes. Then he advances immediately to capture the wolf. Mord places his hand on the ground and uses his entire body to propel himself forward. And when the werewolf realizes what the protagonist is doing, it's already too late. The protagonist is concentrating a lot of mana in his hand. With just one blow, the wolf is struck with a shock powerful enough to send him flying and completely destroy one of the nearby buildings. The others who were watching the fight are worried about wolves, while the protagonist is more concerned about his home. Afraid that the werewolf might have died, they quickly rush to check on him. But it turns out the man is fine. He's just a little sad for having lost and won't be able to face his master after failing. He remembers the conversation he had with Vidin, where Vidin said Mord could become a tremendous help. So he asks Bowles to bring him in, even if it meant using unconventional methods. The werewolf slowly begins to get up, while the protagonist remarks that the fight is over but that he also lost his house in the process. At that moment, something approaching startles him. The werewolf manages to stand up again, but his energy is completely different. A dark aura spreads across his entire body, and the beast now seems to have completely lost control. Mord wonders if he still has another trick up his sleeve, as his form has changed again. And since the man's strength has grown tremendously, the protagonist realizes he won't be able to hold back and will have to use his divine power. However, before he can do so, someone yells for him to stop the fight. And at the same second, something strikes the werewolf's back. The blow sends him flying meters away, halting his transformation. The two men rush toward the person who did this, shouting the woman's name, revealing to the protagonist that she is Erna, the 7th child. The men are concerned about all this violence, but she explains that if Wolse had continued, he would have died from being unable to control that form. She adds that Wolse will agree with her, so they should take him to the doctor. We then see that the man is completely incapacitated on the ground. She turns to the protagonist and says that they've never met before, but that she's heard great things about him. As she approaches, our hero notices that her physique is similar to his. However, unlike him, her face looks like that of a delicate girl, while her body resembles that of a gorilla. When she says she wants to be called Big Sis, the protagonist immediately refuses, thinking this girl is very strange. A while later, we see Erna in her room, humming a pillow and screaming in embarrassment. Her butler comments that this is why he told her not to execute the cool big sister operation. Since Mord is an illegitimate child who has lived his whole life as an inferior, it would be strange for someone superior to suddenly want to be his friend. But that's exactly why she thought he'd like her. She's also impressed that he defeated Wolse without using divine blood. Even her butler is shocked, as despite Wolse's inexperience, his abilities are those of a specialist warrior. Of course, the defeat of Wolse quickly spread rumors about the protagonist throughout the Artucci. Soon, everyone was talking about how he defeated Wolse. As the butler suggests they try to persuade him with a good proposal, someone bursts into the room. Before the woman can say anything, the man announces that Viscount Winslow has declared that Mord will accompany him on the obstruction mission. The next day, we see the protagonist returning home, surprised that's already been repaired. He thought the wolf would be furious for losing the fight, but in fact, Wolse accepted defeat and even paid for the repairs. However, when he looks up his house, he sees Mr. Kestner watching him. Kestner says that the protagonist has been causing trouble since he returned, but the hero explains that everyone is fighting over him, so it's not his fault. Kestner then says that in 10 days is subordinates and he will go on a mission and asks if the protagonist will join them. Our hero already knows what kind of mission this is, and the man confirms that it's to prevent demonification. Demonification occurs when the demon world attempts to contact humanity, causing monsters to mutate and a demon appears, becoming the core of the dungeon. In short, demonification can be separated into 3 stages. The first stage is when an unknown vortex appears. The second stage is when the vortex solidifies, making it possible to enter. The third stage is when the region around the vortex begins to corrupt and creatures from the demon realm become more powerful. When the third stage is complete, a dungeon break occurs where demonic monsters fully connect to the world. To prevent damage from the third stage, it's best to stop at the second. Kessner explains that although it's a good opportunity, it's a dangerous mission where many people die, so he won't force him. Our hero knows that Kessner, the Archduke's right-hand man, will be very helpful in the future, so it's worth the risk. And since he's already gained a lot of attention after the fight with the wolf, it's better to accept Kessner's offer and be under his protection. He then gets up from his chair and says he accepts, asking if he should start training in the afternoon. A while later, the protagonist heads to the training hall with Kessner, where he's introduced to the team he'll be joining. The blonde explains that this is the boy from the rumors, the one who defeated instructor Daisley and recently bested an intermediate warrior. Mord looks at the team, trying to evaluate them. He notices that none of them seem very interested in his presence, but he knows they're advanced warriors at the very least. They're probably concerned about a rookie warrior being thrown into a special mission, so he has no choice but to prove himself. One of the men begins walking toward the protagonist, and he prepares for a fight. However, before anything happens, the man grabs his hand and introduces himself warmly, saying that he's the rookie everyone's been talking about and that it's a pleasure to meet him. This unexpected attitude leaves our hero confused as he was expecting hostility, but he soon realizes that everyone accepted him quite easily. Before things get out of hand, Kessner calls for attention, ordering them to focus. For the next 10 days, they will focus on teamwork, and he mentions that he needs to challenge the tomb of the god of combat, so he won't be able to participate. He instructs Erickson to take care of Mord, which Erickson confirms. The man starts by telling the protagonist that they should get to know each other first, introducing himself as an advanced warrior, and Reek, who is also from the Vernar's lineage. In the strategy they will use, our hero will help Reek support Kessner, and since teamwork is important, he hopes they all get along well. However, the protagonist looks at Reek's unfriendly face and wonders how he's going to get along with this guy. Erickson then calls their attention, saying they don't have time to waste, pointing to the training area and telling them to start. 10 days later, Viscount Kessner emerges from the tomb of the god of combat. Some men ask if he wants to eat something before heading out, but he says he must prioritize the mission. Kessner bids farewell to his subordinates, who urge him to take care. He's worried about the protagonist, wondering if he has adapted well. But when he arrives at the training grounds, he sees that Morn has adapted all too well. There's a battle happening between 2 people using divine blood. Not even Kessner can immediately identify whose power it is. When he looks at the protagonist, he thinks Mord looks completely different from when he first used the spirit of the god of combat. At that moment, Erickson approaches and Kessner asks how Mord is doing. Erickson responds that they taught him mana combat techniques and basic skills as he didn't know them before. He adds that Mord has also managed to increase the time limit of his divine blood activation, impressing Kessner, who comments that's not something easily trained. Meanwhile, our hero seems to be having fun, engaging in combat training with Reek. He finds it thrilling because every time he learns something new, he feels like he's evolving a little more. He reflects that in the past he had no dreams or goals and couldn't do anything. But now he feels like he can do anything he sets his mind to. A few hours later, the captain gathers his subordinates and tells them they are heading to the mission area. He asks if anyone is concerned about how the mission will go. But Erickson says no, since with Kessner around, everything will go smoothly. Kessner, however, is thinking that while individual skill is important, teamwork is crucial, which is why he was worried about whether the protagonist could adapt. But it seems Mord is mature enough to adjust to the surroundings, and Kessner finds him to be a bit more mature than he expected for his age. He then asks Mord if he'll be able to handle it, and the protagonist confidently replies that he can't wait to get started. Kessner is relieved, knowing that the hero is confident. He then orders his team to conserve energy until needed and to press forward into the battle. Sometime later, the squad reaches their destination. But when Kessner checks the dungeon situation, he realizes that the second stage of demonification has already begun. One of the dungeon observers arrives, and knowing the agent's capabilities, Kessner questions why the erosion has started earlier than expected. The man explains that it's because a new demonification front has appeared in the region. He goes on to explain that if demonification occurs in 2 nearby locations, the likelihood of them merging increases, which accelerates the erosion and makes it more dangerous. Even though they are tired, Kessner orders everyone to get ready. He leaps forward, followed by the rest of the group as they search for the dungeon's core. Our protagonist, while observing the castle, thinks it looks like he's staring at a picture. The reason for this is that a massive demonic castle stands in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a huge storm of lightning. He deduces that this is likely the dungeon's core. However, it won't be that easy to reach as a swarm of hellhounds appears, all of them bloodthirsty and spewing fire from their mouths. But of course, they aren't the only monsters our heroes will have to worry about, since right behind them, a group of orcs can be seen. Kestner orders the protagonist in Cage to activate their divine blood. At the same time, the three begin their transformation, causing a small burst of destruction around them. As the three undergo their transformation, those without Werner's blood simply watch. Even so, the hunt finally began and everyone charged toward the monsters. Each member focused on their objective. Even those without Kestner blood managed to use a variety of weapons and techniques to hold their own, destroying every demon, hound, and monster in their path. The ogre, realizing that they were actually at a disadvantage, began to grow fearful. As he watched one of the hunters preparing a lightning spear, the ogre tried to propel himself forward to strike. But with just one throw, the hunter unleashed a blast like a Kamehameha through the monsters. Despite appearing to have the upper hand, Kestner still felt something was off. The pace was unusually quick compared to the number of monsters. Reek soon noted that the demonic fusion was already underway. The protagonist added that it was too late to call for reinforcements. Therefore, the plan had to be executed perfectly, and they needed to clear a path to the center as quickly as possible. Kestner ordered the protagonist and Reek to handle the Cyclopses, while he took care of the rest. The protagonist immediately began preparing his attack, once again concentrating mana in his fist, and with just one punch sent several Cyclopses flying backward. Reek was impressed, noting that even though it was Mord's first time facing demonification, he showed no fear. He realized the protagonist was truly different from a normal person. The problem was that Reek became too distracted watching his friends battle, failing to notice a demon right in front of him. The creature began condensing energy in its mouth ready to fire. Reek knew he needed to cast a spell as quickly as possible, but it seemed like there wasn't enough time. However, before the demon could fire, a light descended from the sky, and like a meteor, something fell, eliminating the monster. It was the protagonist who had managed to stop the beast's attack, telling Reek he was there as his reinforcement. Reek nodded in agreement, and the two of them charged at the creature, attacking in unison and forcing it to its knees. This was the moment the protagonist had been waiting for to strike its weak point, its eye, which was now completely exposed. With a simple attack, he managed to eliminate the demon. Watching this scene, Reek was truly terrified. He had thought the boy was different, but the reality was that he was an absolute monster. Before the creature's blood could rain down on them, Reek conjured a shield to protect them, commenting that the Viscount had probably already reached the center, and they should hurry. However, as he looked ahead, Reek became alarmed. The Viscount was standing still, staring at something. It quickly became clear that there were several demons in the distance, 5 of them, indicating that the fusion had already occurred. Kestner explained that the fusion had accelerated the demonification. Moreover, there were 2 high-ranking demons at the dungeon's core. But as the protagonist was following his companion, he suddenly stopped. Something had grabbed his legs. The monster let out a malevolent laugh, and the protagonist was immediately pulled down. He tried to call out to the superior, but when Reek looked back, it was already too late. The protagonist had been taken. He fell hard onto the ground, confused by what had just happened. But soon he heard a voice remarking that he had fallen from that height and was still intact. So he was probably a young man with the blood of the god of combat. Surveying his surroundings, the protagonist began to grasp the situation. He had been taken to the demon gate that connects to the demonic world. This was likely the deepest part of the dungeon, and the man standing before him was its core. The demon introduced himself as Baron Ultrace, chosen by the root of formidable darkness, one who would bring death and chaos. On the surface, Reek informs his captain that Mord has been taken, alarming Kestner, who wonders when it happened. The bald warrior tells him to follow as he knows where Mord was pulled. When they reach the location, however, they are surprised by what they see. Meanwhile, down below, the protagonist questions Baron Ultrace about why he brought him there. The demon explains that when 2 demonic territories merge, one leader must remain to become the core, and in this case, it was him. For now, the other leader is up above having fun. Since he lost the duel, he became the core, but with 3 people carrying divine blood, he decided to at least devour the youngest one. He explains that he always prefers the young over the experienced because fresh meat is tastier. Even a protagonist isn't confident about fighting a demon at this level. It's explained that the stronger the demon at the core, the wider the variety of demons spawned, ranging from common to advanced. However, there are nobles ranked from Marquis, Count, Viscount, Baron to Baronet. A Baron is strong enough to kill most specialist warriors, which is why Kestner, up above, realizes this is bad news. He knows the boy has immense potential but hasn't fully unlocked it yet. Therefore, fighting a noble demon will be difficult. Kestner remarks that the demon is disgusting for choosing to capture the youngest while being confident in devouring them. Reek says he'll help, but as he begins to transform, the captain tells him there's no need. He fully activates his divine blood and says he'll handle it alone. Meanwhile, the protagonist below is thinking that there's no need to test this demon any further. If his only option is to fight, then he'll give it everything he's got. The demon, still confident, questions if the protagonist really thinks he can do anything with divine blood. But before he finishes his sentence, he's hit by a kick from our hero that sends him flying. The demon, however, manages to stay on his feet and acknowledges that the protagonist is better than expected, but warns that his end is near. The red-skinned demon clasps his hands together and begins performing a ritual, summoning a circle behind him. From the circle, fireballs are launched toward the protagonist. But as the attacks approach, the protagonist simply readies a punch. He strikes the demon's magic, shattering the entire illusion. What he didn't anticipate was that the fireballs would explode on impact with him. The Baron mocks the hero, saying he'd hoped to toy with him a bit before killing him. But before he can continue talking nonsense, he's punched straight in the mouth, sending him flying and kicking up a huge cloud of dust. As the demon checks if his jaw is still intact, our protagonist is already preparing another attack. He summons several energy spheres into the air and hurls them all at once toward the demon, causing a massive explosion. Reflecting on how he's fought many people since becoming Mord, this is the first time he's truly gone all out. The problem is, when he looks ahead, he's shocked. The demon, having lost 50% of his health, has entered his second phase, triggering Berserk mode, and the protagonist is stunned that he can still move after that attack. Even so, Mord had anticipated that it wouldn't be easy to defeat this demon. The Baron begins to approach, destroying the ground with each step. With no other choice, the protagonist starts to tap into the power of the crystal, raising his mana to match the demon's. The two energies clash, causing a shockwave to burst in all directions. However, a sword begins to materialize in the demon's hand. Its sheer size alone matches the height of the protagonist. Baron Ultraze readies his first attack, but the protagonist is closely watching the sword's movement. Before the blade can reach him, he charges at the Baron, delivering a punch with all his strength. After the successful strike, another cloud of dust rises from the impact. As the protagonist looks back to see if the demon has finally been defeated, it seems that the Berserk mode took its toll, as the demon's head is now consumed with rage. At that moment, the demon's body begins to fall slowly, and the only thing left floating in the air is the dungeon core. Realizing what it is, the protagonist is left astonished, while the core glows, showing that he finally managed to complete it. On the outside, it seems that Kessner was also successful in his fight. Stuppy orders Reek to collect everything, since he must head as quickly as possible to the deeper layer to try and rescue the protagonist. Reek says it's dangerous for him to go alone, and that he should wait for the group, but he quickly leaves, telling the man to stay calm. However, when he gets there, he finds the protagonist unharmed. He becomes startled, looking around and wondering where the demons are. Our hero says there was only one wielding this sword. Then the man says that this is a sword used by a noble demon and wonders if he killed him. The protagonist says he got lucky since the monster let its guard down, but Reef thinks that even with its guard down, it would still be impossible for a noble demon to lose to a boy who just awakened. So he says that the money this sword will bring in is quite a lot, thanking the boy and finally considering him a true warrior. We know that Kessner brought the protagonist on the mission so that he wouldn't get involved in the conflicts of the successors. He wanted to become a protective shield until it reached a point where Mord could choose what to do. And for that, he thought it would take at least 5 years, but now he thinks 1 year will be enough. After completing the mission and preventing demonization, they received a few more, which is why it took a month and a half to return to the Archduchy. There, Kessner explains that in a few days there will be a banquet, where they gather everyone who has completed missions to receive rewards, and it's held every 2 months. Since the rewards are given by the Archduke himself, it's an important event, so he tells him not to be late. Our hero knows that many important people will be there, and he is sure that the successor candidates will be too. In the novel, the protagonist faced many life and death battles with the Archduke and therefore devised a plan to resolve the conflicts with him. The key to this was getting close to Leon Werners, someone who left the house. He made him Archduke, and after that, the succession war began with Leon Werners at the center. So when he won and was officially recognized as Archduke, the Werners family became an important ally of Aiden. Since our hero is against the protagonist and against everyone who is his enemy, the best ally now is the Werners family. So he needs to bring the Archduke to his side, and so far there are 5 strong candidates, and they will all probably be at the banquet, so he must keep an eye on everything that happens. Erickson appears, calling Mord, and when asked if he was waiting for him, he said that probably no one would accompany him, inviting him for a drink after the reward ceremony. Someone then calls the expert warrior Erickson and the common warrior Mord to enter, and as soon as they step in, everyone at the banquet begins talking about the protagonist, who managed to defeat a Baron demon alone, talking about his physique and that he might be even stronger than the legitimate sons. Someone then greets Erickson, saying it's been quite some time, and he quickly bows his head, explaining what he truly does, introducing himself to the young Master Dren, the 3rd candidate to succeed the Werners. He asks the young master to give him a moment as he would like to speak to Mord alone. However, someone appears saying they don't find that polite and calls him brother. Soon the blonde man with a goatee looks back, questioning what he's talking about, then realizing that the young man is Vidin, the 6th candidate to succeed. Vidin says it's obvious what his brother wants to talk to Mord about, assuming he wants to bring him to his side. However, the man with the goatee says his brother is completely wrong, and that in fact he came to apologize for the rudeness of his subordinate. Last time he sent a letter to the protagonist through his allies and clearly instructed them to be polite, but it seems they were rude to our hero. So he must apologize for not controlling them properly, handing a small golden box to the protagonist, and hopes he will accept it as his apology. But our hero realizes that he is only apologizing in front of everyone, so they can't refuse. In truth, This man is much smarter than he had imagined and probably excels in socio-political matters. Mord thanks him for the gift while the man remains smiling. But someone who is not all happy is the redhead, watching the scene, who is furious with his brother, thinking he is trying to take more for himself. So he also approaches the protagonist, explaining that he met him through his subordinate Wolves, whom he had previously defeated. But before he could finish speaking, someone calls for the protagonist, and immediately the redhead knows whose voice that is. Soon our hero turns, greeting his sister Erna, while she says there's no need for all that formality. She also turns to her brothers, saying she wants to talk the protagonist for a little bit too. This makes the redhead even more stressed, saying he doesn't want to lose him to a younger sister. His sister says that he's someone who really likes younger relatives and even hurt his arm in their last encounter. But the redhead responds that it was a necessary punishment because she hurt his legs. The bickering continues while the protagonist analyzes that Vidin is the Duke's son and Erna is the daughter of the Duke's sister, so they likely don't get along well. Looking around, he realizes that there are only 3 successor candidates present. Dren Vernars, who is careful but not very trustworthy, Biden, who is a spoiled daddy's boy, and Erna, who is somewhat odd, though he still doesn't know what her real abilities are. However, at that moment, another person arrives, giving orders to the younger siblings. Erna is surprised that her brother is there since she thought he would be busy. Even the redhead can't believe he came, as he doesn't like banquets. But soon the young man explains that he only came to personally meet the star of the event, introducing himself as the expert warrior Huron. When he shakes our hero's hand, he remarks that his hands are callous and that he must have trained a lot. He is impressed by his recent feats of defeating a baron with his fists and says he would like to fight alongside him one day. Our hero remembers that this man was one of the candidates who made it to the end and that he seems like a nice person with monstrous talent. However, at this banquet, one person is missing, and he starts looking around, wondering where young Master Alan is. But at that moment, his search is interrupted by the man presenting the banquet, who announces that the Archduke wishes to speak. The old man says he is impressed by the achievements everyone has made in these past 2 months, and that now they will begin the reward ceremony. The first to receive his reward is Kessner, who kneels before the Archduke as he speaks some words of honor. The next to be rewarded is our hero Mord, introduced as a 15-year-old boy who killed a baron demon, and to make the reward match the level of his achievement, besides giving him the trophy, they will raise his ranking to intermediate warrior, leaving the other nobles impressed, as he has only completed a few missions. However, since he already killed a baron, everyone assumed he would be ranked as an expert warrior. The Archduke says that our hero has evolved greatly since the last time they met, and that you would love to see his current skills. And our hero, a bit downcast, says he will count the days until then. A while later, everyone is at the banquet, but the protagonist is interrupted by Kessner, who says he needs to talk to him. Then he pulls him aside, telling him not to drink too much since tomorrow he will go to a new place, and he soon explains that his master wishes to see him. Sometime later, we see our hero walking through the castle corridors, where he comes across a giant door, wondering if he should open it. But before he touches the door, it begins to open by itself, and he realizes that someone is using telekinesis. Inside, there is a man, and our hero notices that he is someone very powerful. The white-haired man says that he has made a long journey to get there, welcoming Mord and introducing himself as Ilden Vernars. He is the general of the elite warriors legion called the Watchers Legion and also the older brother of the current Archduke. Even though he was the first young master, he ended up being defeated in a combat spirit battle against his half-brother, the current Archduke. After that, Ilden never appeared in public again, leaving our hero confused as to why he had been summoned to his mansion. The blind old man asks to see the protagonist's face, and as he analyzes the hero's features, he says that he doesn't look much like his father. Then he asks if he knows why he was summoned. Seeing that he doesn't, Ilden explains that he wishes to make him an offer, but first he would like to test his abilities. The protagonist recalls that in the novel, Ilden wanted someone's help to take down Leon, who had tremendous potential due to Aiden's support. However, if he proves his potential here and now, the old man will choose him. Seeing the child before him activate the divine blood makes the old man give a small smile. As he already prepares for combat, with a leap, the protagonist advances quickly, attacking Ilden before he could do anything. But his attack ends up hitting a ball of energy that appears in front of him. And the moment his fist collides with the ball, he is instantly thrown back. Realizing that the ball reflected his attack, he understands that it's not an ordinary impact ball, since it was enveloped in his aura, which is something even master-class mana fighters cannot do. Moreover, he is controlling dozens of them at once. This is impressive because controlling aura is not easy, as it is beyond the realm of mana control. It's only possible to control it this way if one's mana senses are extremely developed. But as he prepares to attack, he thinks that aura is not impenetrable and should avoid the rebound from his physical attack and push him back with brute force. As the protagonist charges forward, the old man comments that his mana has increased, and soon he begins unleashing several attacks that nullify the old man's aura balls. Realizing that the young man is fast, he still believes he has the advantage since he can create more impact balls. However, this was already something our hero anticipated. so he creates his own impact ball. Like erasing it in his hand, he lifts it and begins spreading the ball's energy throughout the room, causing several other mana balls to appear in the air. Then, like a forest of lightning, all the old man's attacks start being replaced by the protagonist's. Realizing that he managed to nullify his attack by using his own momentum against him, the old man is shocked, wondering where the young man learned something like that. However, soon the protagonist appears behind him, landing a punch to his back. But the punch hits Gojo's impenetrable barrier. Realizing that the old man uses his own aura as armor, he decides to use the fragment of the world to gain much more mana. The old man says it was good that he used his opening against him, but the momentum is decreasing. However, while distracted, he ends up getting hit by an impact right in the middle of his back, which hurls him into the wall, causing massive damage. Mort is happy that he finally managed to land a hit on him, but then he starts hearing laughter echoing through the room. It is explained that there are several levels of awakened divine blood, and the first is when the color of one's hair and eyes turns gray. Still laughing, the old man says that finally, while wondering if this is fate, he believes the god of combat is probably watching this fight. We are then shown that at the second level, gray lightning circulates around the user's body, and reaching this level means one's existence is nearing the divine realm. Before our hero could even react, the man's already behind him, preparing to strike him with his fist. But Mort doesn't retreat and strikes back as well, making both attacks collide in the air. However, in the exchange, it is only the protagonist's fist that is trembling, and soon, he is thrown against the wall just as he had done to the old man. Looking at the child, he comments that his reflexes are incredible, impressed that he managed to hurt him even while using the second level of divine awakening. And on top of that, our hero shows no fear in battle. Delun says that it's enough and that he doesn't know how far it could go if he is too carried away. Meanwhile, our protagonist remarks that even though the man lost to the Archduke, he still possesses monstrous power. Soon the old man approaches, saying that his legion needs someone strong like our hero, making Mort ask if that's the offer while the calm man confirms. His desire is for Mort to join the Watchers Legion. The Vernar's Archduchy has a legion of warriors called the Guardians Legion, meant to be the elite of the elite alongside the Watchers. Since the southern region of the continent has a large demonic territory, the Watchers are responsible for monitoring that area. The White Demon Kingdom has not yet been fully demonized, but it's on the way, and one of the Guardians Legion's roles is to fight against other influences within the continent. Their opponent is an organization that holds nearly the same level of power as the Vernar's family, the renowned Ordar's family. One of the reasons it's dangerous to join the Guardians Legion is the recurring conflicts with this family, which lead to the highest death rate. That's likely why Casimir wasn't too happy, as it's the most dangerous place in the world for a warrior who has just awakened his powers. The old man explains that all the successor candidates want him, and the special treatment and requests will not stop coming from all sides. Casimir is helping him, but he has his limits. However, the White Demon Kingdom is a place where the successor's influence doesn't reach. The protagonist knows he's right, and besides, he stands to gain a lot if he goes there. So he says he has two conditions, leaving the old man intrigued as to what those conditions might be. The first is that the protagonist wants the old man to be a sparring partner from now on, making him think that Mort wants him to teach him. But Mort quickly clarifies that he just wants to spar, leaving the old man curious, wondering if he believes he'll grow stronger simply by dueling with him. Then he quickly states the second condition, which is that he wants to roam freely for a year under the excuse of being on a secret mission. The old man asks what he plans to do for an entire year, but the protagonist doesn't answer, even though he knows the selfish request. However, it is during this time that the novel's protagonist becomes stronger, so he needs to find the world fragments before Aiden discovers their existence. For a second, the old man gives a small smile at this request, understanding that he has no other choice but to accept it, but he will only allow the protagonist to roam for 8 months. This was expected, and it shows that Ilden is very generous with those he holds high expectations for, as was depicted in the novel. Even though he doesn't fully understand why he's giving his all to make Leon the Archduke, this is still a great opportunity, so he thanks the old man for his generosity. While he thinks that even the current lord wasn't as strong as him at his age, and as a bastard son, he cannot become Archduke, but he can be the shadow of one. Sometime later, we see the protagonist talking to his servant, asking why those soldiers are there. But he finds out that they are earnest subordinates and that she is waiting for him inside. Upon entering her residence and finding his sister seated, he begins the greeting, but she explains that he doesn't need to be so formal since they are not in public. She then places a box with some inscriptions on the table and tells him to take it. His sister asks if Dran's gift was good, discovering that it was just an expensive healing potion. Then she quickly says that this is much better than a simple potion. As he opens the box, he begins to see a glow coming from it, revealing a crystal ball of blue liquid inside. He instantly realizes it's a treasure that can make any human incredibly strong. This is his chance to make a giant leap in his progress, and it's called the Tear of the God of Combat. In the novel, Aiden gave this to Leon to boost his strength. However, a side character ended up taking it instead and died. Erna explains that she received it as a birthday gift when she was 10 years old, and it is a very valuable item. But if he can't handle it, it will act as a poison, advising him to take it only when he's ready. She explains that when she helped the imperial family on an expedition, she received the same gift. So she used the one she got for her birthday and kept this one. Meanwhile, our hero is simply shocked that she gave him a potion that only 3 succession candidates had in the original story. He then thanks her, but she says it's nothing and just wishes to talk more when he returns. Sometime later outside, our hero thinks that she only came to deliver this gift. He won't forget this and the fact that she valued him to this level even though he's not on her side yet. 20 days pass, and our hero seems ready to start his journey. However, before leaving the castle, he runs into Kessner, who questions whether he's really leaving, when the protagonist says he just wanted to slip away quietly. The blonde man says that while our hero might be strong, he's only 15 years old and still doesn't understand how dangerous the North is. However, he's surprised when the protagonist simply thanks him for everything and says he will never forget his care since Kessner endured all kinds of pressure from the successor candidates while trying to protect him. Even so, at no point did he try to control him or stand in his way. In truth, he was only being kind to Mord, so the hero vows to repay him for everything he did. Then he tells the man not to worry, asking if he really thinks he can't take care of himself, and that he'll see him again once he returns, bringing a good drink for them to share. Even though the protagonist tries to ease his mind, Kessner remains a bit serious, but soon gives a smile, saying there's nothing he can do to stop him from going, wishing him good luck, while the protagonist wishes him good health so they can meet again. As he leaves the castle, we see that he's being watched from the top by someone. This person quickly jumps from the castle walls, and once on the ground, begins blending into the surroundings, becoming invisible. Mord seems to sense someone's presence and looks back, but when he turns around, he sees nothing but grass. It's then explained that those who learn Impulse must go through several levels, and the first is using Impulse on the sword and body. The second is using it like a gauntlet. The third is to imbue and strengthen objects with Impulse. The fourth is to condense and accelerate it into an explosive power. And the fifth and final level, which most magical artists can't reach, is known as Aura. Our hero spent 20 days dueling with Ilden. However, he wasn't satisfied with just duels and taught him several important things during those days. Thanks to this, he became stronger but is still not close to using Aura. However, the small creature before him is capable of making our hero awaken his aura immediately. A few days later, deep in the forest, our protagonist is thinking that the warriors sent by the Archduke to ambush him should arrive soon, since they want to capture him before he reaches the northern territory. At that moment, something almost hits the protagonist, who barely dodges it. And when he looks up, he is surprised as a battalion of warriors is there to ambush him. One of the commanders shouts, "Fire," and a barrage of arrows is launched toward our hero. The man thinks his plan works since there's no way he can dodge those thousands of arrows. However, from the smoke, small lightning bolts emerge, and soon the protagonist is revealed to be unharmed, having activated his divine blood, leaving the warriors impressed that he activated it so quickly. The general then orders the mages to cast fire magic on him, which heads towards our hero. But he begins preparing a new magic, summoning those same impulse balls he used in his fight against Ilden. And when the two magics collide, a massive explosion occurs, devastating the entire forest. Due to the fire and heat, the forest is now nothing but ashes, as we see several warriors lying on the ground. The last surviving mage thinks this is impossible and never imagined he would beat the fire using explosive impulse, realizing that the boy is far better than people said. Mord simply looks coldly at the last remaining mage. Then he quickly advances, delivering a punch to the barrier the mage is summoning. But he's surprised when nothing happens after punching his shield. However, all he needs to do is punch even harder. But before he can finish his attack, he is ambushed by one of the remaining warriors. Upon hitting the protagonist, the man seems to notice something different. He realizes that the MC is using an aura gauntlet. Thus, he discovers that our hero is now capable of controlling aura. But before he can do anything, he gets struck by the protagonist, who manages to catch him while still in the air and delivers a punch directly to his chin, sending him flying like a meteor. Although the man is severely injured, he remains alive. Meanwhile, the protagonist speaks, saying that he knows who he is. He states that his name is Varen, and that he is considered the best warrior. He quickly explains that he saw him once in the training center on the day of the banquet. He asked about him because he was alone in the ceremony and was told that he's the best martial artist in magical combat. He's a cunning man but has a short temper, so it's best not to approach him. The enraged man asks who said that, but the protagonist doesn't answer, of course. Instead, he says that Varen is the loyal dog of the Archduke, so he's sure it was the Archduke who sent him, probably after his fruit. In the novel, the Archduke appears as a powerful but unforgivable villain. And there's a simple reason for that. He committed the terrible sin of consuming his own children. The Archduke's subordinate is shocked, wondering how the protagonist knows this. But the protagonist remains silent, looking at him with superiority. It's explained that in the novel, the Archduke always displayed great combat talents but became alarmed as he started aging. At that time, a secret society called Silver Blood approached him, offering a solution to consume his own bloodline. With the Werner's bloodline as a fertilizer, a fruit that maintained his youth would grow. And since it was more effective when he used someone who had already awakened the divine blood, the Archduke sacrificed all the bastard children, leaving only Mord. The reason was that he needed someone to fill the role of Archduke since 5 years ago the god of combat left the seal of the Demon King for his descendants to protect. Once a year, the Archduke must fight against the reincarnation of the Demon King in a one-on-one duel. Since the duel doesn't take place in the real world, he doesn't die if he loses, but the seal weakens. However, he can't enter again, so losing is akin to losing his position as Archduke. That's why he needed someone to fulfill that duty for him. We then see the Emperor holding a twisted apple with veins while someone asks if he's going to see Mord before leaving. However, he replies that he won't and that he doesn't understand why his brother is taking the boy to the Guardians Legion. He even trained him for several days at the mansion, so he can't comprehend why someone so precious was sent alone to such a dangerous place. But in reality, that doesn't matter. It would be great if Mord swore loyalty, but he's someone who can't be controlled by anyone. So the best option now is simply to devour him. After Mord bites into the apple and closes his eyes to focus, when the Emperor opens them again, his transformation is complete. Lightning bursts from his body, showing that he's in the second stage of divine blood. He then turns to Varin, ordering him to bring the protagonist no matter how much power it takes, warning him that Kestner is also keeping an eye on him, so he must be very careful not to get caught. Varin thinks that only those chosen by the Archduke can know about his dark side. And even though Kestner is the warrior the Lord trusts the most, he doesn't know about this place. That's why Varin is determined to prove to the Archduke that he is better than Kestner. But currently the man who is confident in capturing the protagonist finds himself severely injured. Meanwhile, the protagonist questions whether he came to capture him to obtain the fruit. Our hero had guessed this because it wasn't hard to figure out that the Archduke wanted to capture him. For the bastard children, there are only two paths. Considering the fact that the bastard children have been disappearing more frequently, he likely already met with the silver blood. Also realizing that he can't use him, the Archduke must be thinking of simply getting rid of our hero by consuming him. Mord was sure they would send a master-rank magical combat artist, which is why he acquired aura by using the tears of the god of combat. Then he approaches the man, telling him to be quiet and explaining that he's going to die here, so he'll be kind enough to explain the future. The patriarch will perish in a pathetic way, and everyone will remember his name as something shameful. Hearing this, the young man remains ignorant, claiming that the Archduke is a divine being with the greatest talents in the world. But the protagonist remains silent, realizing that this man is completely submissive to the Lord. Varin, after analyzing for a moment, thinks that maybe it's possible for this to happen, since just moments ago the boy managed to create an aura gauntlet, and he's only 15 years old. His talent surpasses even that of his master. That's why he cannot allow such a monster to evolve. He quickly draws his sword and launches an attack on our hero, activating the Aura Blade, technique capable of cutting even the successors of the Werners who have awakened divine blood. However, this won't affect the protagonist as he has the Aura Gauntlet. But at that moment, Varin begins emitting a strange aura, making our hero realize that he's using his own life force to amplify his power. All of this for the worthless Archduke to whom he swore loyalty. And while Mord admires this determination, there's no chance that Varin can defeat him. Soon the energy balls launched by the protagonist explode, while the charred young man realizes that he combined aura with impulse to make this happen. This should have been impossible since he had just learned how to use aura. However, the protagonist appears, bidding farewell to the Archduke's loyal dog, and finishes his opponent with a well-placed punch. The masked man who had been observing from a distance thinks that Mord is much stronger than they were told, and that he knows about the fruit and the silver blood, making him a huge risk to the organization. He immediately starts running to inform his superiors. But what the mage didn't count on was that the protagonist had not forgotten about his presence, finishing him off with a simple attack. As the mage falls to the ground, the protagonist looks at the remaining blood on his hand, noticing that it has a silver hue, realizing that the man was part of the Silver Blood organization. Warren thinks that he got involved with them sooner than expected. It's going to be annoying if they come after him. But that doesn't matter. He just needs to become stronger and eliminate whatever comes his way. However, at that moment, he ends up punching the air and hitting something. He then says to the invisible person that he knows they've been following him all along, asking them to reveal themselves. Yet the person remains in their transformation, trying not to be detected. His arrogance irritates our hero, who starts delivering a barrage of punches at the invisible figure. This forces the person to partially reveal themselves, somewhat stressed out by Mord's immediate resort to violence. Mord notices that the young person has pointed ears and deduces that they are likely an elf, a species that bears the symbol of long life, growing and aging much more slowly than humans. But since this boy's ears are smaller than those of an elf, he must be a half-elf. So he asks the boy who he is. The boy introduces himself as Keel from the Guardians Legion and says he's part of the Shadow Wolf Squad, which works directly for General Ilden. It is explained that the Guardians Legion, responsible for preventing demonization in the northern region, has the descendants of the Werners as its core strength. However, there are other squads like the Shadow Wolf, which specialize in different tasks, such as protecting allies and assassinating enemies. For this reason, they possess stealth abilities that are different from the common Vernar's warriors. The young man believes his stealth is the best among all the Shadow squads, but even so, the protagonist managed to detect him. He then explains that his master sent him to escort Mord, and that he was supposed to help him when he was in danger to ensure an escape route if necessary. But after seeing how easily the hero destroyed those men, he realizes that Mord is a much greater monster than the general had described. To prove it was a direct order, he hands over a bracelet, explaining that his lord said this would be proof enough. Upon seeing that mysterious item, our hero understands that it was indeed Sir Ilden who sent him, as this is the bracelet he himself broke in battle. When the young man hears that the protagonist managed to break the general's bracelet in a one-on-one fight, he's astonished, while the protagonist tells him to go back home. Turning away, Mord tells the young man to leave since he has already failed his mission, or rather, neglected it. However, the boy knows he can't return as his general would be disappointed. Thus, he says that he will repay his failure by assisting the protagonist throughout the journey. Not only that, but he will also stand guard during the night so that Mord can sleep and take care of basic tasks like cooking. Hearing the young man practically humbling himself, Mord is confused, wondering if he's really willing to do that, and he recognizes the boy's name from the novel. A boy abandoned by his father for being a half-elf, who, when on the verge of death, was rescued by Sir Ilden. When the protagonist and his companions were fighting against him, it was this young man's spiritual magic and stealth that helped a lot. Of course, since he was just a side character, he ended up dying later, but despite appearing young, he's an expert in assassination, and considering that Silverblood will likely ambush him, it wouldn't be bad to have him as a companion. Especially since his duty is to protect Mord, the hero accepts the boy's offer. He orders him to start cleaning immediately, and when the young man asks what he should clean, Mord explains that it's the battlefield and all the men left on the ground. Since leaving traces behind isn't a good idea, this will prove how skilled he is. Meanwhile, at the Lord's castle, someone reports that Varian was defeated. There were signs of a battle, but no bodies, leaving the Patriarch impressed, as he didn't know Mord had an escort. Even so, he orders them to let the boy go for now and just keep an eye on him, knowing that the Silver Blood organization likely suffered losses as well. Thus, even if they do nothing, Silver Blood will act on their own. We then return to the protagonist, where Keel is impressed, saying that this was the tomb Mord was looking for, and that it took them 5 days to find. He soon asks what they should do, but the protagonist simply lies down, saying he will wait until nightfall. He orders the half-elf to stand guard until then so no one gets close. The young man tries to ask why they're doing this, but our hero is already deep asleep, leaving the young man disappointed since he realizes Mord won't tell him anything during the trip. By nightfall, the half-elf looks a bit frustrated while lighting a fire. He is a respected person in the Artucci and an advanced warrior with 10 years of experience, but now he's practically working as a cleaner for a child who is only an intermediate warrior. He tries to calm himself, thinking that this is just a job, but as he's about to curse the protagonist, he hears his name. He quickly pretends that he wasn't talking about anyone, but Mord merely warns him that it's starting. When the young man wonders what is starting, he notices a dimensional rift forming in the air. It is explained that there are secret dungeons that can only be revealed when all the conditions are met. And in this dungeon there are 3 conditions. The first is that the moon must be in its waxing phase. The second is that nothing must obstruct the moonlight from reaching the ground. And the third requires someone with divine blood to be within 5 meters of the tomb. Initially, this dungeon isn't that important, but the reward inside is of great interest to our protagonist. Realizing that his young master is about to enter the dungeon alone, the half-elf boy explains that Mord doesn't know what dangers could be lurking inside. But Mord quickly reassures him, saying he knows exactly what to expect and that he can handle it alone. Therefore, Keel's job is to make sure no one gets close. Before the half-elf can say anything else, Mord leaps into the dungeon, passing through the portal mid-air, leaving his subordinate completely alone in the forest. Inside, we discover it's the Lunar Temple. In the past, many gods existed, but none remain now. These temples used to be dedicated to venerating them. Soon, something catches Mord's attention. When he looks ahead, he sees several skeletons walking and screaming that an intruder has invaded the tomb. These skeletons are warriors who gave their souls to gods who have since perished, leaving only the madness of their souls behind. Looking around, Mord realizes there are more than 100, but doesn't matter, as he just needs to get rid of them quickly. It's said that these souls are terrifying in the real world, but in this realm, defeating them is possible with ordinary methods, all because of the mana. And we see the protagonist easily smashing through several skeletons. Even though they are easier to deal with here, they are still warriors from past lives. So Mord prepares a mana ball using aura and hurls it at the skeletons, causing a massive explosion. No matter how strong these warriors once were, our protagonist is far stronger now. Now that all the minions are gone, he just needs to deal with the Guardian. As he approaches a statue, a goddess with a dog's face, he says this is the core, and the Guardian is this creature now rising before him. We then discover that the Guardian is another werewolf, angered because Mord has trespassed on sacred ground without permission and declares that he will be sacrificed to the goddess. Mord recalls that this lycanthrope was supposed to be a powerful enemy in the novel. Even though Aiden was stronger than most advanced mages, he struggled against the werewolf because he had magical defenses thanks to the blessing. While the werewolf warms up, he says that the protagonist has invaded the sacred realm alone. And though disrespectful, it seems he understands the pride of a warrior. For that reason, he will be treated as one. Soon, all the wolves and werewolves gather around Mord and the Guardian, forming a kind of arena. The lycanthrope declares that the battle between warriors is the most sacred thing, and since Mord came with pride, he will respond in kind. Mord finds this odd, as this didn't happen in the novel. Nevertheless, he says he prefers to fight one-on-one. However, as he prepares, he says he doesn't want to waste time and commands the Guardian to shift into his final form instead of waiting to die slowly. In the novel, the Guardian was revived with the power of the goddess every time Aiden and his friends killed him, so it would be better to start the fight in the final stage. Hearing these arrogant words, the werewolf says it's rude and wonders what makes Mord think he can say such things. But soon the protagonist reveals his transformation, asking if he should prove it through sheer force. Upon realizing that the young man before him is of divine blood, the werewolf acknowledges that he is qualified to say such things and agrees to do as Mord requested. He begins absorbing the power of his subordinates, growing until he reaches an enormous size, surpassing even the hero's expectations. Mord then charges at the giant werewolf, and the two attacks collide in midair. However, in that moment, Mord is surprised by the light the werewolf emits, realizing he's using a divine shield capable of blocking aura. But just because something can block aura doesn't mean it can block it forever. So our hero starts breaking through the shield with a flurry of punches. The werewolf has no choice but to defend with his body. Yet his strength isn't enough and he is thrown far away. Realizing that the young man is as strong as expected from someone with divine blood, the werewolf considers trying something else, but the protagonist is already in front of him, delivering another attack. However, the strike misses as the werewolf ducks his head just in time. With a malicious grin, the werewolf lands a counterpunch to Mord's abdomen, feeling pleased to have landed a direct hit. But his satisfaction fades quickly as he notices that Mord absorbed the impact through his muscles. Mord then grabs his opponent's arm and remarks that he has an interesting acceleration ability, but in a fight, speed isn't everything. He then throws the werewolf into the air, leaping after him. Mord begins preparing an aura-infused attack. Delivering a solid hit to the lycanthrope's face, the creature is sent flying into the goddess statue, bouncing off it and crashing towards the ground. Our hero uses the statue to change his trajectory, preparing a final blow to finish off the monster. In midair, the werewolf is helpless and Mord knows this is the end. But before completing his attack, he notices a smile on the werewolf's face. However, this doesn't stop our hero from kicking the creature, finally ending the fight, and he feels relieved that he didn't need to use the world fragment or the blessing from the god of combat. Still, he wonders why the werewolf was smiling at the end. Suddenly, a voice echoes saying that the battle was impressive and thanks Mord for granting its warrior an honorable rest. The statue explains that the werewolf wanted to die as a great warrior, but was stabbed in the back by an enemy and died dishonorably. Unable to forget this, he became the ghost of this dungeon, and what the protagonist did for him was a great gift as he freed his soul. Mord understands that this was probably why the werewolf smiled. He finally got the duel he wanted. The statue then gives Mord a gift for freeing the warrior's soul, explaining that it is a bracelet that when exposed to moonlight will protect whomever he wishes, whenever he wishes. Analyzing the item, Mord realizes that this is something Aiden never obtained in the novel, and it will be extremely useful when he needs to fight while protecting someone. He thanks the goddess, saying he will make good use of it, but soon notices that her presence has already vanished. He moves closer to wrap things up, striking the statue, which reveals the crystal he had been searching for. Mord is pleased that he finally found the world fragment, and as the crystal shines, it captures his attention. Sometime later outside, we see wind spirits swirling around the dungeon, while Keel, sitting on a rock, asks if Mord has finally completed it. Mord notices that these spirits are the half-elf's summons, and he stood guard just as ordered. He's starting to appreciate how obedient the young man is. The half-elf then asks if they can go to a village to sleep, but the protagonist says they'll pass through several cities and villages from now on, as they'll be traveling across all corners of the kingdom. Sometime later, we arrive at the merchant city of Lurine. We see the servant begging for rest since they haven't stopped walking, while our buff Jigakya hero is happy that he's managed to acquire 2 world fragments. After completing the Wolf Goddess dungeon, they finished another one, but it didn't yield any additional rewards. Now their goal is to find a particular object and venture into a specific underground location. The two then find an inn to spend the night. Mord explains that they'll stay there until nightfall, but the half-elf says he needs to leave, hoping his master will stay in the room until he returns, begging him please as he has something important to take care of. Mord lies down on the bed, telling him he can go report to the city leader all he wants, as he already knew everything from the beginning. The half-elf is shocked that Morgan already figured it out, but he also explains that he needs to ask for more money, as these expensive lodgings and daily meals have left him completely broke. As he leaves, he says he'll be back, and our protagonist replies that he won't leave unless something inevitable happens. Several hours pass and night is almost upon them. However, as Kyo returns to the inn, he notices everything is on fire. He almost feels like he has clairvoyance since something inevitable really did happen. It is explained that as pieces the ancient gods used to create the complete world, each world fragment contains a different element. While one might contain lava fields where fire spirits dance, another might hold arid, sun-drenched deserts. Like puzzle pieces, they can fit together, and once they do, they can grant immense power. Another incredible thing is that when these fragments are united, the user can unlock a mental realm they can access at will. From the outside, it appears as if they are simply meditating, but in reality, the individual is in their mental training. It is explained that the world fragment he obtained from the tomb of the god of combat contained a towering mountain that reached the clouds, and the fragment from the dungeon had a dense forest, but unfortunately, the third fragment didn't connect with either of the other two. However, at that moment, the protagonist feels something. Mort immediately stops in the middle of the forest, sensing a presence. We return to the real world, where the inn he was staying at is under attack. Outside, a woman is screaming frantically for her son, who is trapped inside. She begs the men holding her back to let her go as she desperately wants to rescue him. At that moment, our hero emerges from the burning building, holding the child in his arms. He hands the boy to the woman, who thanks him profusely. However, Mort isn't interested in the gratitude and immediately assesses the damage caused. People are helping each other, and they've hired a healing mage to assist the injured, since women, children, and men were caught in the explosion. Seeing this disgusting scene, Mort begins to feel stressed. At that moment, he spots two people fleeing amidst the chaos. Realizing that one of them is responsible for the explosion, he picks up a stone from the ground, muttering that he doesn't know who the person is or where they're from, but he will make sure that their coffin stays closed at their funeral. We then see a man with a ponytail running from a hooded figure. Frustrated that he can't catch the man, the hooded figure fails to notice the protagonist approaching from behind. Mort launches a quick attack, which the hooded figure barely dodges at the last second. Even so, the man had to stop his pursuit and angrily demands to know who the protagonist is. But Mort dismisses him, saying it doesn't matter and he doesn't need to know who he is, especially since he's already dead. The hooded man with a face tattoo doesn't know who sent Mort but calls him weak, saying he won't be able to defeat him. However, in the very next second, our hero appears behind him, landing a solid punch to his face, sending him crashing into a wall. Coughing, the man seems incapacitated as Mort approaches, ready to end the fight. But before he can do anything, the man who is being chased shouts, saying he doesn't know who Mort is, but he shouldn't underestimate this guy. The hooded man takes advantage of Mort's distraction and swallows a pill. As the protagonist watches the transformation taking place, the other man urges him to run. However, it's too late. The transformation is complete, and the man is turned into a hulking brute like Ronnie Coleman. He orders the protagonist to pay attention as he's about to display his full power. But in that moment, all his strength and power are reduced to nothing with a single blow from Mort. Liu, the blonde man with the ponytail, in utter shock. Mort orders him to come down immediately. Every instinct in the blonde man tells him to flee. As he prepares to do so, he gets kicked in the back, slamming into a distant wall. Our hero then orders the man to kneel and answer his questions, remarking that knocking him out would be the best option. We then see that the man is already trapped in a chokehold by Keel, panicking as he struggles to breathe. Soon, his mind begins to fade, and he wakes up later in a completely different place. Terrified, he threatens to scream. The protagonist gives him a warning. Other than answering the questions, he better not dare open his mouth. The first question is why he was being chased. Mort explains that the man probably belonged to the organization of the Second King. The man tries to speak but gets punched in the head, and the MC explains that these people are part of the Monarch's return group, which seek to revive the Archlich. It's explained that the hierarchy of mages is clear. There are beginner-level mages, intermediate-level mages of the 4th circle, advanced-level mages up to the 6th circle, senior mages, and those in the domain of the 9th circle are called high mages. The title of Archlich is given to high mages who have become undead, commonly referred to as monarchs, as they command armies of the undead. The Archlich of the Monarch's return group had a backup plan in case he was defeated, fragmenting his soul into pieces and scattering them. Once all the pieces are gathered, he can be revived, and that's what the Monarch's return group is seeking. But even knowing all of this, Mort still doesn't understand what this man has to do with it, wondering if he's a subordinate of another secret group. The blonde man, realizing that Mort can use aura, knows he must be of Vernar's blood and thinks it would be a problem if the Archduke opposed their group. However, his silence only angers the protagonist, who prepares to punch him again, causing the man to quickly blur out the name of his group. The blonde man explains that their goal is to prevent the 3 prophecies of ruin from coming true, one of which is the return of the monarch. He further explains that if the Archlich that these people worship is revived, the world will practically come to an end. Mort recalls that in the novel, the Lich was easily defeated by the protagonist, and he finds it amusing that someone like this is trying to stop a world-level disaster. He then returns to his first question, trying to figure out why that man was following him. The blonde man finally speaks, saying it's because he stole something important. Mord shows him a key and asks if that's what he's talking about, discovering that it's a key that opens doors to ruins. Since this group called Grumolder and this key didn't appear in the novel, Mord realizes that the story has likely deviated from the original path due to the theft of the key. The resurrection of the monarch happens near the end of the story, and even though Aiden and his friends manage to defeat him, he still caused thousands of deaths. For this reason, Mord decides to prevent the sacrifice of those people and stop the monarch's return route. Mord then turns around, saying he's going to keep the key and orders the man to leave. His servant Keel questions whether it's really okay to let him go, but Mord responds that the group isn't that strong, so there's no need to worry. He explains that their current goal is the complete annihilation of the monarch's return group. He then states that there are fragments of the Archlich's soul in the ruins, and that's where they'll start. His servant asks if they're going immediately, but Mord explains that they first need to go to the black market. It is then revealed that he purchased a torn book and an old dagger, leaving Keel confused about what he plans to do with these items. The two head to a rather foul-smelling place, and Keel wonders if the great Archlich really left part of his soul there. The protagonist explains that there's a hidden passage in the water, and he instructs the young man to use his spiritual magic to unlock the path. The half-elf activates some of his wind spirits and has them search through the water until they find the passage. He's pleased that he succeeded, while the protagonist notices that even though Keel complains a lot, he still follows orders. The wind spirit then begins preparing a gust that splits the water like the Red Sea, revealing the hidden path. However, when they reach the door, they find it sealed with magic. The protagonist explains that the dagger will come in handy now, so he makes a small cut on his hand, saying that long ago the gods were at war with one another. At that time, the warrior god lost everything to the gods who wielded magic as their weapon. That's why he sacrificed his own existence to create this weapon, an artifact that only those with divine blood can awaken. Moreover, its function evolved to work as a key for ancient ruins. To use it is simple. Just invoke anti-magic and destroy the magic. Throwing the dagger towards the sealed door, we see it begin to glow as shoot out some lightning, quickly dissipating all the sealing magic. Mord calmly calls the dagger back to his hand. The half-elf is impressed that Mord bought these overpowered items for the price of a beer, but Mord remarks that this is exactly how the black market works, and now it's time to fulfill Keel's wish. It is revealed that before their journey began, Keel wanted to venture into dungeons and discover hidden treasures. Mord then tells him that after they finish off the monarch's return route down there, this is the exact secret dungeon he was searching for. The two descend, and Keel is amazed by how vast the place is. He asks if they shouldn't launch a surprise attack, but the protagonist explains that they likely already know of their presence and will attack them soon enough. At that moment, several ghoulish monsters appear, while a group of mages and warriors question who these intruders are and how they managed to enter. Mord immediately charges forward, plowing through the ghouls and heading straight for the group. During the attack, he senses two men approaching, so he summons his aura gauntlets to block their attacks, leaving the two men confused by the gauntlets and realizing that if those are aura gauntlets, Mord must be at master rank. Mord easily disposes of the monarch's henchmen, and as his eyes glow the golden hue, the enemy mages begin preparing to strike. But before the mages can do anything, they are practically wiped out by Keel's wind magic, who asks what the mage was even planning as multiple wind spirits swirl protectively around him. A little later, we see the same mage crawling on the ground, screaming that he's being chased by a monster. However, in the next moment, this mage will meet Hades personally. Keel, who finished him off, thinks to himself that he's not so bad after all. But of course, they are nothing compared to Mord. He then points to a large door and says it must be the entrance, while the protagonist mentions that first they need to destroy all the magical objects because they are dangerous. After destroying all the cursed items, they finally stand before the door, and the protagonist says that now the dungeon truly begins. He uses the key he took from the man the day before and opens the gate, realizing this seems to be some kind of demonification dungeon. This is a dungeon created by borrowing the powers of demons, but it's not necessarily connected to the demon realm. Since there was no detailed information about this dungeon in the novel, the only thing Mord knows is that it's subterranean and goes down 9 levels. It follows the standard dungeon pattern. The deeper it goes, the stronger the monsters become. It was definitely not supposed to be an easy dungeon, but the two of them cleared it in under 10 minutes. Keel looks quite happy with their loot, having acquired several good magical items, and says that with all these, he won't need to worry about meals for months. Looking ahead, he notices their true objective. They then see Archlich Monarch seated on his throne. The Lich remarks that it's been a long time since he's seen something alive. Just from the energy alone, the half-elf can sense the Lich's strength. But Mord says there's no reason to be afraid, as this is only a fragment of the original. This surprises the Archlich, who acknowledges that despite being an unwelcome guest, Mord knows of him. However, as Mord begins to transform, he says that he doesn't know much about the Lich, nor does he need to, as he's merely a relic of the past, and he'll make sure to render him even more dead. Seeing Mord's transformation, the Lich recognizes him as being of the Werner's bloodline, and remarks how strangely only the most arrogant seem to pass through here, yet all of them have been eliminated. He explains that the protagonist is nothing more than a remnant left behind by the god, and for that, he will teach him the greatness of magic. He then summons 2 diamond golems, but the protagonist quickly appears behind one of the golems, destroying it and creating a cloud of dust, while the Lich expected him to have this level of power. What he didn't expect, however, was the punch that was about to come his way. The Lich reacts quickly, casting a defensive spell to block the MC's strike. Yet, as he stands there, a wind spell begins to swirl around him, forming a tornado with the Lich at the center. Even so, the Lich finds the trick annoying and with a single stomp, activates the Fored's curse, which suppresses all of Keel's magic. Upon realizing that his spell was nullified with just a single movement, Keel is terrified. But this is the moment the protagonist was waiting for to throw a dagger at the Lich. The Lich finds it irritating that the dagger bypassed his defensive spell but believes it won't do much damage to his body. However, it's at that moment that the dagger begins to glow. As you may know, an Archlich is a being made entirely of dark magic, and the effect of an anti-magic weapon on a creature made of magic is completely lethal. Thanks to the immense shock, even the Lich's robes are torn to shreds and he can't comprehend how something like this exists. Taking advantage of the opportunity, MC remarks that letting one's guard down in a fight means death. He then activates the mountain destruction technique, shattering the Archlich into countless pieces. His skeletal skull rolls across the floor, but it's swiftly caught by the protagonist, who tells the Lich to shut up and that he'll always be a loser, both now and in his original form. And with that, Mord finally defeats the skeleton once and for all. Mord turns to the subordinate, saying that Keel did well in buying time as it made the battle a bit more convenient. As Keel praises the dagger for piercing a defensive spell, the protagonist explains that if it had been an active spell, the dagger wouldn't have been able to penetrate it. The two then proceed to search for the dungeon's core, finally encountering the 4th fragment of the world. And when they destroy the core, they finally return to the real world, with the dungeon's entrance being a fake room. There, Keel looks around in search of something, but when he realizes that the thing he's looking for is not there, he starts screaming in despair for having lost all his loot. Then he looks at the protagonist, who is also a little confused. He then asks if the protagonist knew this was going to happen, and that no matter how much he thought about it, a dungeon that had been closed for more than 200 years maintaining so many intelligent undead is strange, questioning if it was a dream of chaos. It is explained that the dream of chaos is the boundary between reality and a dream. It's like a very powerful illusion, but everything you experience there is real. The problem is that nothing from this dungeon can be taken to the outside world. Mord thinks that his hypothesis must be correct since being locked in this place for 200 years would lead to a mental collapse, but it's different if these minds are fake. He then says that he didn't know this and that he wasn't trying to deceive him, but since he was part of the battle, he will give some loot to compensate for what he lost. He then prepares a punch while warning him not to complain about the loot. That punch was directed at the ground, and the two begin to fall into a secret room that was right below. Upon landing, the protagonist thinks that this place is actually a secret space and that it can only be found after solving the hidden puzzles inside the fake room. Keel, after looking around the room for a bit, is amazed, seeing some objects on altars, while Mord thinks he didn't need to solve the puzzles since he already knew where the place was. Soon, the half-elf mercenary is happy that all those things look expensive. He says that now they are in a place that really looks like the treasure hall. He begins to analyze it bag while the protagonist explains that it has a dimension 5 times larger than the space of this room. Not only that, but is capable of automatically retrieving any item from inside and is made so that only the owner can touch it. But obviously, the protagonist is not going to give the OP item to his servant, giving him another item instead. This is the lightning ring, capable of allowing the user to use lightning magic up to the 6th circle. Additionally, it has great defense against lightning-type magic, and it seems that the young half-elf is quite pleased, although he had a somewhat suspicious look on his face as he looks at the ring he received. Among the other things in the room, there's the necklace capable of protecting someone against unauthorized magic use and detecting subtle magic. There's also this golden key that also acts as a map, prompting Keel to ask how many parts there are in total, discovering that there are 7 and soon questioning if our hero wants to find them all to prevent the resurrection of the Archlich. He says yes, but also because the 7 parts are fragments of the world, and now that they've taken everything, they must leave. But before leaving, they approach the skull that is in the center, and Morn explains that this is the part of the Archlich. What they defeated in the dungeon is the manifestation of a consciousness imbued in this part, and if they don't destroy it, he could come back. In the novel, the protagonist and his friends imagined that this was just decoration and ignored it. As a result, the Archlich was revived. However, now this insect will not hurt anyone else. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.